on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Human conflict with nature is natural. Inherently, nature is trying to kill all of us. It's a cruel place. It's a beautiful place.
Whitetails do really well at the edges of human habitat. There's so many people who live in areas where they probably have excellent deer hunting but don't even realize it because they're thinking they need to get out further.
I referred to whitetails as the cockroaches of game animals. They're just really adaptable. They can recognize the difference in non-threatening and threatening human behavior.
Who's inheriting hunting? Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. An entirely different set of social values, an entirely different set of environmental values.
The only way to combat climate change is habitat. We need to create more habitat.
It's incredibly ironic to me that AR-15 Glock 19 sales are driving conservation money.
It's about the birds, it's about the land. It's going on in perpetuity. It's not about passive conservation, it's about activism.
Episode 172 of the WildFed podcast, Uncommon Perspectives with AJ DeRosa, is brought to you by Surthrival. Right now, it's Surthrival's annual colostrum sale. This is our biggest sales event of the year and our clients' most favorite. All colostrum products are 20% off until March 15th with the coupon code OPTIMIZE. I use a third of a cup of colostrum daily in my blended drinks, and I have for years. I consider it one of the most sophisticated nutritional supplements in existence for its ability to improve the immune system, restore the lining of the gut, improve lean muscle mass, repair tissue, and so much more. It's a favorite amongst athletes, bodybuilders, longevity experts, and for anyone trying to repair their body from the inside out. If you're a serious user or you're ready to start using it seriously, I highly recommend the 1 kilo or even better, the 2 kilo container. I call that 2 kilo container the Darth Vader helmet since it comes in a huge black tub that reminds me of Mr. Vader's helmet. Also, give a try to our naturally flavored colostrum powders as well. Chocolate with real cacao, vanilla with real vanilla bean extract, and strawberry with real strawberry juice. These aren't the fake flavors you're so used to in most supplements today. Go to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup of health promoting supplements and use the coupon code OPTIMIZE for 20% off all colostrum products. Surthrival. Why just survive when you can thrive? Do you need an antidote to the metaverse? We just launched our newest t-shirt design over at wild-fed.com. It features our antidote to the metaverse tagline on the chest, a WildFed badge on the sleeve, and 2 tarot-style cards juxtaposed on the back, one modeled on the tarot card known as the Fool, who's wearing an Oculus and absent-mindedly walking off the roof of a building with a bag of fast food in one hand and a cell phone in the other. Next to it is a card based on the Magician, who's juggling 4 implements, a fishing rod, a rifle, a trap, and a foraging basket. It represents our belief that a life that includes the outdoors inoculates you against believing that an artificial experience of life could ever replace a natural one. You see, for us, being wild-fed, hunting, fishing, and foraging is about a lot more than just getting our groceries. It's an antidote to the metaverse, an act of rebellion against the transhuman agenda that is leading humanity to abandon the natural world in favor of wearing screens over their eyes to live in a virtual one. We choose the natural over the artificial. We choose an antidote to the metaverse. We choose to be fed by the wild. Check out our new shirt at wild-fed.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. AJ DeRosa is the founder of Project Upland, a multimedia operation that produces, in addition to video and web-based content, a quarterly subscription-based premium print magazine about upland game bird hunting. He's also the author of the deer hunting cult classic, The Urban Deer Complex. An accomplished hunter, rabid conservationist, and success in the hunting industry, he's not your typical hunter. Whether it's his politics, which are woven as a through line throughout his unique positions, or his insistence on activism as a key component of conservation, he occupies a space adjacent to, and sometimes quite antithetical to those, typified by what could be seen as an often monolithic mindset amongst those who hunt or fish. As someone who's often felt like an outsider in the world of hunting, frequently expressing views that run counter to those of my fellow outdoorsmen, AJ is altogether more revolutionary in his approach. When we first met and I heard him speak, it was a surprisingly refreshing, if not sometimes challenging, stream of consciousness I hadn't heard expressed in hunting circles before. Being some 6% or less of the American public, those of us that hunt understandably have more often than not chosen to silo ourselves and as a result have suffered from a kind of slow progress with respect to the rest of the public at large. But AJ is different. Different than any hunter or conservationist I've sat down with yet. Don't expect a rehashing of the same old talking points here. He's not that guy. But he might just be the foreshadowing of the voice of the future hunter. As a new generation inherits the 3-million-year-old tradition, they bring to it new ideas, paradigms, ways of viewing the world, ecology, our predatory presence in it, and our place in the grand scheme of ecological diversity. Change is scary and often easier to resist than embrace. A lot of us behave like a dog on a leash. Pull back too much and the dog feels that urge to push forward against the pressure. That's the knee-jerk response a lot of the hunting world has taken to the changing cultural, economic, scientific, and ecological landscape we're encountering in this rapidly evolving decade and the ones preceding it. We dig in and resist change. But this is, in my opinion, the wrong approach. At least it's an approach that always seems to eventually give way to progress regardless. So if you hear ideas expressed here today that run counter to those you hear at the range, hunting box store, or in hunting camp, know you are, most likely, hearing the voice of the future. However threatening to the status quo it might be, resistance is, after all, futile. We'll all be assimilated. Seriously though, change is coming. It's inevitable. And what is most important isn't the way we've been doing it, but rather preserving our relationship to the natural world. Let's welcome all ideas, even the radical ones, even the ones that scare us. Even the ones that challenge our most closely held illusions. If we don't, the world will surely pass us by. If we can't thread the needle of holding on to what we cherish and allowing ourselves to adapt to change, we as hunters might just go the way of the passenger pigeon. Change is coming. How will we adapt?
AJ DeRosa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for making an hour and a half pilgrimage. Is it down this way or up this way for you?
It was kind of diagonal.
Yeah.
I think you're a little further north than me.
Yeah.
But
good.
Yeah, I mean,
I always want to be more north than everybody.
yeah, totally right. Hey, that's like that New Englander pride thing. Like,
yeah,
exactly. Are you a Flatlander? I'm not a Flatlander. Where I live now, I grew up as a Flatlander, but yeah, I'm definitely in that area. But hour and a half, dude, that's like you're my neighbor.
Yeah, it's true. Around here, that's nothing. When I was a kid, there was like a couple of weeks, my mom moved with a boyfriend of hers to Island Pond, Vermont. We didn't stay there long, but they wanted to do like an apocalypse shelter in the mountains type thing. And that was the first time walking down the streets of Island Pond, people were yelling Flatlander at me. I mean, never heard that. It felt like out of a sci-fi movie or like some kind of Deliverance or something, you know? Just like, what are you talking about? But
I feel like that whole commentary just made me understand you so much more. Now that I got insight on that.
That's all it takes.
That life.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Well, so we first met at the National Wild Turkey Federation, did a live podcast. Yeah. So I got to meet you there and felt like, oh, this is a guy I got to connect in more deeply with. But you're involved in some pretty cool stuff, man. I'd love to
Thank you.
Get a little bit of, I'm sitting here looking at your book, Urban Deer Complex 2.0, but also Project Upland, your magazine. So maybe you could kind of take us through a little bit of what you currently do, and then I'd love to dig into sort of how you came to be.
Yeah, so I'm the founder and creative director of Project Upland, which will be our 10-year anniversary next year. Wow. This year is our 5-year anniversary in print. Which is pretty exciting. I mean, we started as a film-based.
Okay.
So I went around and, pretty much just filmed people grouse hunting, grouse and woodcock hunting, because this is where I was from. And, I've always had a love for photography or film. And obviously I wrote a book about deer hunting, but I grew up both deer hunting and grouse hunting. When I was younger, we grouse hunted. When I got old enough, I was allowed to go deer hunting. And my reconnection with grouse hunting came when I was much older, and that was when I was looking to really disconnect from a faster-paced lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Rough grouse allowed that at a little different way than deer hunting had done it for me.
Yeah.
And deer hunting burned me out. I mean, I was, I'm obsessive about grouse hunting, but I'm also not juggling running a nightclub in downtown Boston at the same time.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah. Dude, I'd be changing out of a 3-piece suit on the side of the highway to go into a tree stand at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
But those days are long gone. But that all made me, I've worked in the city most of my life. I worked in the sheriff's department when I was before that, and then I worked in the flooring business. I was in the tile trades, and I did a lot of work in the city, and then I ran a nightclub in the city. So that time I spent so much time, and it just made me, kind of yearn for the bigger, wilder places. And I did grow up going to those places. My family had a camp way up north and, just before Canada in New Hampshire. And then we also had an area that we would go out to every year in Western Mass in the Berkshires, where my grandfather would put his trailer up for 2 weeks during the deer season every year. And, it was the first time I ever went deer hunting when I was 9 years old there, and followed my father around. So that was kind of, I wasn't unfamiliar with these more wild spaces. And I grew up in North Andover, which is about a half hour outside of Boston. So North Andover is every time I feel like I visit my mother, it gets a lot more developed.
Right.
Not,
when you were younger.
Yeah, there was definitely wild spaces there. A lot of them. A lot. It was pretty easy to get out of kind of the inner of North Andover and then be in, ag country and big forest, Boxford State Forest, stuff like that. So there's definitely always that kind of. But as I got older, I just wanted more wild and more remote. I wanted to really unplug. So
did you get serious about deer hunting as an adult before you got interested in grouse hunting again?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I'd say the evolution was, being a young kid during, October, and we would spend the weekends with my father, and he would, we'd literally walk out his doorstep. He lived in southern New Hampshire, and we'd go hunt grouse and woodcock. I mean, there was grouse and woodcock then. It was the 80s. So, and he had Brittany's, and that's what we did. And that went on until, my early teens, and then my father had gotten divorced again, and gave up his dog and moved into a more city area. But once I was able to legally hunt alone, deer hunting was what I did, grouse hunting in North Andover. I mean, I can recall vividly the last rough grouse I saw in North Andover. I mean, it's just unfortunately not in my lifetime has it ever been could have been a sustainable practice. So deer hunting was it. And I took up bow hunting. I was the first person in my family to bow hunt, and I ended up in the woods and see deer do things that I'd never saw them do before, because, traditionally you were in those woods for that 2 week,
right,
block of hunting. And then, I missed this deer. I'll never forget it. Opening week, I missed this deer. I had a recurve bow, and I shot every arrow in my quiver at it and missed her every time. And it was so many emotions, embarrassed, felt like I couldn't handle pressure. I mean, on a target, I was deadly as could be. And I left there just scratching my head. And I went out and bought a compound bow. And, the next one did not get away. So, and I just went down this insane rabbit hole. I'd kill, 6 to a dozen deer in a season, jumping between different, New England states. And just really became just overly obsessive and fascinated by it. And
for how long did that last?
Oh man, I mean, I would have started when I was 18, and then I would say that I hunted pretty heavy into archery into my, early 30s.
How old are you now?
I'm 41.
Yeah. And you're pretty accomplished overall, right? You've got some pretty significant deer that you talked about to me last time.
Yeah, so I've shot 6 deer that would qualify for Pope and Young. I've never entered them. They're in Northeast Big Buck Club, but I never interested them in Pope and Young. But when I shot those deer, it was unheard of, that level of consistency. I mean, there were people that did it. I knew those people. You gravitate to those people and whatnot. But that was a highly unusual thing. So, and I was obsessive about it. I'd put a lot of time into killing a mature buck. Just a lot of scouting, a lot of planning, a lot of finding new areas to hunt, really just dialing it down, really obsessing about behavior and stuff like that. So it was just one thing led to another. And I actually had a really good mentor once I got a little further into it.
It sounds like a lot of what you did was in that sort of suburban or near the urban environment.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that a little bit? Because for two reasons. One, I've never really had an episode here that's delved deeply into deer hunting. And then also, and I get requests for that a lot, but also there's so many people who live in areas where they probably have excellent deer hunting but don't even realize it because they're thinking they need to get out further, push further away. Right?
And I think the reality is, especially for New England, the more remote you go, the less deer there are, and there's enough woods for them, So, I mean, when I was younger, that would have been 20, 30 deer per square mile. And I bet you North Andover today is upwards of 70 deer per square mile. And that's most of southern New England is just, and I should say south, eastern New England, because western Massachusetts has still got pretty low deer populations and whatnot. But, what's funny is, my grandfather back in the, 50s would go hunting out in western Mass because that's where the deer were. And the spot we ended up hunting was ultimately because he got lost in a state forest out there and ended up wandering onto this guy's property in this blizzard. And he raised Angora fur rabbits, and he ended up telling, he hit it off with my grandfather, and he allowed him to come in camp on the property. So this started back in the 50s, and then when my father was old enough, he would go out there, and my uncles and whatnot. And then when we became old enough, at 9 years old, you were allowed to start going. So my brother was 4 years older than me, so he was already going for some years, and we get to take a week off from school, and we do this, and there was deer there, and that's, or when I was younger, it was still like the populations at that point were pretty low. But when I became old enough to hunt in Eastern Mass alone, I mean, now I'm not going to drive to Western Massachusetts. Like, I want to do this actively around my area. So I started exploring those areas, and I just started seeing deer all the time. And, it's like these more remote places of New England, it's like spotting the Yeti, for deer hunting sometimes. And unless you're unless you're tracking, unless you're a Hal-Blood or a Benoit, there's really no true, method of hunting the North Country. So point being, I started seeing all these deer all the time, and I'd tell my father and grandfather. My grandfather's like, this kid's nuts, and eventually my father would do it. And, my father started shooting deer in Eastern Mass, and was just kind of like, what? My grandfather was a little slower to it and eventually did. And I'll never forget, I shot this buck that actually had a broken main beam, and he still measured 150 something inches. And he was a pig, man. He weighed 200 something pounds, dressed out, and you see me, I'm a small dude, and I couldn't get it in my truck. And so the only person I could call was my grandfather. And so my papa shows up and helps me get this deer in the truck. And I'll never forget his face looking at that thing and just being like, I have never seen a deer this big, And it just really made you see how much the landscape had changed in New England in relatively just a few generations of that. And so the opportunity, I kind of grew up when that population really started to spike. It's much bigger now than when I left there, for sure. But it meant a lot of opportunity because, there was definitely a lot of hunting pressure, but maybe not the overcrowding that there is today. Obviously as society goes on and things get more developed in those regions, you're going to have more civilization to hunter conflict, animal to human conflict, all those different kind of issues. So I kind of grew up in its heyday in a sense. I grew up kind of in that golden age of suburban hunting there. I feel like, my friends that still are down there, things are a little different. Some places are still, Connecticut is an insanely cool place to hunt.
In this way, in the suburban way.
Yeah. And I feel like people in Connecticut are just I don't know, maybe less conflicting about it than you would think, because it's such a wealthy area. And
they must see just the roadside littered with dead deer constantly.
Yeah, dude, you can rifle hunt in some of those areas,
really?
Which is just that blows my mind. Yeah. And wow. I mean, dude, we woodcock hunt down there all the time, and the amount of deer you see is just, and the turkeys, man, are just insane. So
let's zoom out for a second. Yeah. So the overall what's happened is that, let me see if I understand this. Whitetails do really well at the edges of human habitat, basically. And then I would imagine 50, 75 years ago, deer at the edge of human habitat were looking very juicy, whereas
Yeah.
today,
Yep.
deer at the edge of human habitat, it's mostly going to be people who wouldn't even conceive of like harming one of them. So,
Yeah.
so is it that you have a boom in population because people in those suburban areas aren't hunting and the deer do so well on the edges of that human habitat? And so it's, do they just have like a safe zone there? Like,
I
why?
think it's a perfect storm of a few things. And I think you remember the night we did that podcast together. I mean, I referred to whitetails as the cockroaches of game animals. And that's very much the reality of like, they're just really adaptable.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's really nothing you can do and now you add in those variables of more limiting factors to hunt. They're thriving in those environments. I mean, shrubberies, gardens, I mean, you name it. And they're a very intelligent animal. They can recognize the difference. You know, I talk about this a lot in my book, non-threatening, threatening human behavior. There's a distinct difference, and they will literally flip a switch between that, that evasive reaction versus I'm totally cool with this.
Yeah, you told me some funny stories about things that you've done that would sound totally taboo, making a lot of noise, dragging things. Yeah. Talk to that a little bit. It's so interesting.
Yeah, so that was the first article I ever wrote was in Northwood Sporting Journal. And it was about, dude, that was published like 20 plus years ago. I was like a kid when I wrote that article. And what I would do is I'd walk down like regular hiking trails and I'd like wear regular clothes. I'm not a person that wears cologne, but I'd like intentionally put cologne on myself. So like, and I'd talk to myself walking down these trails. And so the whole idea was blending in with this like non-threatening human behavior, because how many deer in their life have had somebody shoot at them who's talking to themselves covered in cologne, wearing like, jeans and whatever else. And so I'd walk down the trail and you'd see deer and they just stand there and look at you. And so the whole idea of what I call the theory of fluid motion, as long as you didn't stop, those deer would stay because they wouldn't feel any threat. So I would try to make a shot, and if I couldn't make the shot, I'd keep
walking with your bow and all this gear.
I'd draw my bow back while I'm walking, and if you couldn't make the shot, you'd walk, 100 feet up and turn around and come walking back and walk backwards with your bow, depending on how you had to be, and until you'd make the shot.
Wow.
And I killed a ton of deer, and so I started learning just about how, it was like that behavior, that you could recognize these vulnerable points. And then you take it a step further. And what I started to obsess over when I wrote the Urban Deer Complex was really this concept of hunting mature whitetail. And you start to layer these factors of the things that build a mature whitetail, and it's not the things you'd think of, like hunting magazines and television shows will tell you, that rutting buck that's like coming in. Well, I'll tell you, the most aggressive whitetails in suburban America are the first to die, you know? So you have you'd see these really unusual behaviors, like bucks that don't necessarily rut hard would sometimes be the biggest bucks because they didn't do anything stupid, and you'd see, geographically things would happen. And I used to call it the bylaws of trophy whitetails. And so this concept that, in Massachusetts, you have your state laws that regulate, but then there is a complexity to bylaws in a town. So some towns, most of the Northeast, if a property is not posted, you can hunt it. We're one of, it's the old blue laws of back in the day. In Massachusetts, there are a lot of bylaws that actually overstipulate that. So point being, there are certain towns that you'd still have to have written permission, even though it's not posted. It might be an archery restricted town. It might be a town that doesn't have 93 tearing through it, because all these different things will affect mortality rates. They'll affect how easy is it for the next person to get access there. And you start to compound these different things together and ultimately you end up with these, I don't know, what came first, but ultimately deer that survive in very specific situations because they're most isolated from the opportunity of hunting, or if they were just smart enough to adapt that way. I think it's as simple as, we're rapidly causing an adaptation. We're killing the stupidest ones. The smartest ones are breeding. And then you add in this layer of what's actually called transgenerational stress inheritance. So what that means ultimately is that if a deer experiences something and they survive, or they witness something and survive, they actually pass that on to their young without their young actually experiencing it. It's not a learned behavior. It's not like I'm born and I'm like, hey, dude, don't stick your finger in the light socket.
It's a genetic imprint.
It is a genetic imprint.
Like survives something like gets shot at from a tree, sees the person, doesn't get killed, and survives.
I don't know that it's going to be necessarily so specific.
Okay.
But so transgenerational stress inheritance, which was actually proven after my book was written, and it has not, I wasn't some person who theorized this is the first idea. I want to clarify that. But it was proved in a lab. And ultimately it is stress inheritors. So like if you're, and it's like, depending on the species, it can be more aggressive. Like for instance, ruffed grouse are super aggressive in how much they pass down through transgenerational stress inheritance. Spruce grouse, not so much. So it can vary from species. Humans do it. Ultimately, stressors your grandparents experience, you have them embedded in you, even though you might not have experienced
epigenetically,
them. Yeah. So point being, you end up with this really rapid adaptation that occurs where these deer actually become extremely intelligent. You know, in regards to, and it's
like wary, huh?
Yeah, it's exactly a subconscious, like so they adapt so well, and it makes it really hard for them to hunt. And this is one of the things I always said about my book is, you know, we were talking about this concept of walking down trails, and I have a million just weird things that I've done like that over the years. If everybody starts doing that, they're going to get wise to it. And it's just not going to work anymore.
Right.
So that's the whole thing, is that it's about these, they're going to learn these behaviors and then force them over. And that is going to compound over generations.
Yeah. So you kind of need to be doing what everybody else isn't doing.
Exactly.
Because the thing that everybody's doing, because it's the proven strategy, is already starting to not work as well by the time everybody's doing it.
And there's a lot more bad hunters than good hunters. So like, I remember first time we like hunted the state park during shotgun season in Eastern Mass, and everybody would park their trucks, and it was that whole theory: the further you walk in the woods, the more likely you were to, you know, get a deer. And it was like, you just, you know, the more pain you put into it, the more you can get out. And so I remember going there and being like, you know what, like I'm just gonna like hang out like 100 yards from this parking lot and like just like set up, and I don't think an hour went by and I shot a deer, and I was just like, okay, this makes sense, because it's like, you know, I have a chapter in the original book called Hunting the Hunters, and it's this idea of figuring out what every other hunter's doing and just do the exact opposite. And that would put you in a place to actually shoot deer. And you know, I don't deer hunt anymore. I don't at all. So I don't know. I would be curious to go back to the same places I hunted in my younger days and see how much smarter those deer are.
Right.
Like I think even though the populations are up, I feel like people nowadays are having a little harder time, you know, like, cause they are getting tricked, and hunters are getting smarter, you know, in general, cause you know, you have to. And, so there's that whole kind of layer of evolution, but that like my obsession was cracking that nut, that behavioral nut. Like that was what drove me for sure.
Did you just burn out on it, or do you not hunt now for any specific reasons?
So, you know, I remember vividly the last deer I killed, and it just felt, I just had no emotion. It felt so stone cold, so transactional. And it was a big buck, and I just, the first mature buck I ever shot, I was in a climbing stand, and I started shaking so much after I shot it, like this, you know, these chemicals released from my body, and I almost dropped my bow out of the tree. And I remember sitting down really fast and gripping the sides, and I went through this just emotional roller coaster of like laughing and crying, and just like I never felt such a release of everything. And I chased that high forever. And every deer, it got less and less. And then that last one, it was just like, wow. It was just like, it was all business. And then I was just like, I lost it. And so I get that with ruffed grouse. Every grouse I kill, and add in that layer of a dog and the challenge of trying to do good dog work, and setting in these kind of guardrails of, you know, shooting birds on the wing, and really kind of this fair chase approach that, you know, hunting over pointing dogs can be, really just gives me this emotional connection that feels very similar to what those early days of deer hunting were. And it doesn't feel like it dulls. I mean, I shoot a lot of birds, and it doesn't feel like I don't feel like the edge is coming off. Like,
that's
even
cool.
The better I've gotten at it, that I don't feel like I'm becoming transactional in it. And I feel like when I do feel that way, like for instance, I stopped shooting, woodcock only a couple weeks into the season this past year, and it was just like, I mean, you limit out day after day, and it's just like I can only eat so many woodcock, and then it just starts being like, well, do I really want to do this? And then training the dogs, using that opportunity to reinforce steadiness and stuff like that becomes really fun, and that point is fun. And now I become, kind of more selective for the rest of the season. I became more selective in when I would actually shoot a woodcock. And so none of that edge came off. It wasn't like I was shooting a limit every day and I was like, oh, I hate doing this. I was loving it. But then I was just also kind of like, okay, like, there's got to be some, like...
You need the challenge.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, of just, like, for the bird's sake of saying, like, like, I don't necessarily want to do that level of
extraction.
Yeah. And the killing always has to be present. I wouldn't want to do it without the killing. Although, I do love spring woodcock season is one of my favorite, which is, you can't shoot. It's just purely training your dog. Absolutely love it. We're about to, as soon as the snow goes away, the woodcock will be here. So I savor that and I enjoy it. And, during the hunting season, I very rarely carry a camera, because it's just, in that way I'm a little burned out, but so I just want to enjoy it. But in the springtime, I'll bring a camera because the gun's home, know, so I'm a little more apt to like take that camera out. And one of those challenges is like trying to get just an insane photo of that woodcock with your dog there is just like a whole new layer of just like, I'm going to do this weird thing. But, so I think the dog adds a layer to it that allows for not hitting that rock wall that I hit in deer hunting. Because, the thing is too is, he's my first pointing dog, my Griff, and, there's things that you're always going to look back and say, I would have done it different. You hear people that have multiple dogs, oh, I would have done it different every time. I learned something new. So that idea that dog is unfortunately going to, he's going to pass away at some point, and then you got to start over, and that start over is actually like resetting it. It's almost like I could have reset those emotions from the deer stand,
okay,
so like I can do it again and do it. And there's so many different layers of doing it differently, like I'll get a setter next time. So adding a different breed, things are going to be different, so changing, there's things that you can change about it that, like there's, that's one of the fascinating things about, I think, bird hunting that people miss is the layers of culture and complexity, There's entire subcultures just based on the breed of dog you have. Let's go a layer higher. The style of hunting dog. You have spaniels, do you have retrievers, do you have pointing dogs? Those are all three very different cultures. Now you get down into it, let's say the pointing dog world. The versatile world is very different than the straight pointing breeds like setters and pointers. And then you have those layers inside, setter people are different than pointer people, and Griffon people are different than Brittany people, and it's just these very different it's very fascinating to just see it, and it's really like just different tools and different and different histories that come out because,
culture, like you said,
because those dogs were bred in different places and for different reasons, and then Americans have done things to them too to make them their own. So you see these, and then the guns are a whole other thing, the side-by-side culture, over and unders, semi-automatics, pumps, you get these weird vintage pump kind of circles that people are like, that's my thing, or somebody, side-by-side is a big thing, that's my thing, like you just this hunt for your favorite side-by-side that never ends.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, I'm proud and excited to share that WildFed Season 3 is now airing on Outdoor Channel Monday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern as part of their Taste of the Wild block. This is our biggest and best season yet, with adventures ranging from coastal Maine all the way to tropical Hawaii. You'll see familiar faces and meet new friends that are dedicated to the pursuit of wild foods. Come along with me for prairie dog hunting in the Dakotas, the iconic Alewife Run in Maine, gathering and feasting with the foraging world's most renowned expert Sam Thayer, invasive species hunting on the rugged island of Molokai, and my wife Ivani's first hunt too. If you don't have access to the Outdoor Channel on cable, you can watch it live right along with us on Friendly TV. That's FRNDLY TV.com. They have a 7-day free trial, and the monthly cost is just $6.99 a month. We can't wait to share all these news stories with you. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Now, back to the show.
I got a question about this. I want to tie a bow first on the deer hunting piece, and so we can move on to this piece, which I just wanted to say, you strike me as such a counterculture type character, right from when I met you. It's like, this guy isn't fit with the caricature of the hunter, like myself, long hair, tattooed, just like your own. You seem to march to the beat of your own drum, and so it's really interesting that you figured out this deer strategy by running counter to what everybody was doing, and then had all this success doing that. So that's really interesting to me. But then now I'm looking over at upland game hunting, which I see as I've always seen as like a gentleman's sport, and I associate it with old world European tweed, kind of like wealth and, culture, like that kind of chivalry, all those kind of things, which doesn't seem like your thing at all. You know what I mean? You seem almost like you'd sort of run really counter to that too. So how do you find yourself fitting into that world exactly?
I wrote an article for Outdoor Life actually some time ago to kind of address this whole thing. And the reality is there actually are a fair amount of people like me.
Yeah.
It's upland hunting's like the fly fishing of hunting.
Yep.
You are making things more difficult in some cases intentionally. You're hyper focusing on a little more of an art. Mm-hmm. The idea of killing a rough grouse over a pointing dog, in the place you live, a place you have a connection with the land, with a gun that you've chosen, that you have some kind of strong opinion about, even a gauge you might have a strong opinion about. All of that is very curated, but the thing is that it takes so much to get there.
Yeah.
You can go out and hang up a tree stand and shoot a deer. And I'm not saying obviously you can put a lot of time into it. I did do that, put up cameras year round and all that kind of stuff. But you're living with that dog 365 days a year. And I think the thing that I found for me is, and I think 99% of people when presented with this question would say it's about the dogs. Mm-hmm. And I will agree with that. And, what I will say is, dogs are, it's the first animal we domesticated. I think that there's something beyond human about using and weaponizing a dog, no matter what that application. Mm-hmm. And sure, the dogs that would be on this land, pre, kind of the 1411, those are dogs that would have been more houndish in nature, more general purpose, more running a lot more big game down. They would have been used for some small game and some retrieving and stuff like that, but it would have been a little more opportunistic. So the idea of pointing dogs is definitely more European, but you're still looking at, hundreds of years. I mean, 1400s, I want to say, or something, when we started kind of intentionally. And it's something inherently that if you look back at early dog behavior, we really just separated the things we wanted out, so even the act of baying, your dogs, they inherently want to bay. Mm-hmm. That delay, that hesitation is something ultimately that was harnessed to create a pointing dog. This dog hesitated. And therefore, we were going to create something from this. And then we took, hundreds of years of humans adapting them to be something different and creating all these, micro, these specialized tools that became these, whether it was the location that dictated what it wants or just even the person's obsession on one particular piece of game.
Yeah, or it's fascinating, dogs made to go down holes, and so they get the short little legs and the long bodies, all these different adaptations. It's incredible. I was with a buddy of mine just is running a dog named Blue that is a blood tracking dog, so he's gotten into tracking deer in the fall for friends, and just seeing this little long curly haired thing with short legs made to run through these game trails. It's just so rad to see that. But I had this other question. I had a buddy who's got a German short hair, and he was talking to me about woodcock the other day, and he was telling me that a lot of times the dogs aren't real interested in woodcock. Because I was asking him, like, do you have to introduce your dog to woodcock for it to know to point woodcock? And he was like, well, no, but like sometimes the dogs don't really like woodcock and will even pretend not to notice them, or like, you know, like try to intentionally avoid them. And I was wondering about that, because a woodcock is such a different bird than a typical kind of grouse or pheasant or something.
Yeah, and so with any bird, you know, they smell very distinctively different from the other. So, you know, I'm a firm believer that wild birds make wild bird dogs. You know, and there's a need for using pen-raised birds to do certain things initially, training the foundation for a dog and whatnot, but there's human scent there. You're controlling a condition. There's, you know, just the complexity of scent and dogs, the distance, you know, birds behave differently and only tolerate so much. So a pen-raised pheasant is going to tolerate differently what a rough grouse will, or a pen-raised quail or a pigeon. So point being, even those distances that push. So there's all these kind of different things. And you know, like the piece of advice that I was given when Grim was young was, you know, just prey drive, which is just let him be excited about birds, you know. And so that year one was him just being excited about birds, you know, and there was really no pressure to do anything past that other than be excited about it. But so one of the things that happens culturally, you'll see people talk about with woodcock, is dogs don't want to retrieve them. And so there's a lot of theories about it. Some people say that it's the distinct flavor of the blood once the bird's dead. You know, all these different things. I mean, my dog is really excited about woodcock. I mean, he loves to retrieve them too. He'll snatch them right out of your hand. Like, I haven't had that issue.
They do taste so much different than typical game bird. They're very livery, like stronger than a pigeon even.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like anything. You just gotta know how to cook it.
Yeah. Oh, I like to eat a woodcock, but I can see, you know, compared to a grouse, which is just such a, you know, chicken, like very kind of bland white meat versus something that's got more flavor to it.
And believe it or not, like if you pick up a rough grouse and you smell it and you smell a woodcock, like with our human noses, grouse are stinky.
Yeah.
Like Grim goes crazy for grouse. Like, so there is a distinct difference. So anybody, you know, who spent some time with their dog and has learned over the years, you know what type of bird your dog's on. Like if he's on point, and there's a level of intensity between woodcock and grouse, and you can be like, that's a grouse, you know? And I tell you, when I like cook grouse in the house, like Grim runs around the house like he's a madman, you know, like just a madman. I cook woodcock, he's excitable, but not like rough grouse, he just goes insane. It's just like there's a switch in there, and you know. But again, that's talking about those adaptations, which is kind of interesting that we talked about it with deer, and now over to dogs. I guess I never really thought about this, but you know, he came from a grouse bloodline, you know. So dogs that have been, you know, because they're traditionally the guy who developed them was Dutch. He developed them in Germany when he was running a famous kennel over there for German wire hares. And then when he passed away, the breed was never allowed into the German clubs. So the breed was actually adopted by the French. So there was a distinct break because the French field trial their dogs and the Germans test their dogs. So it's a difference between competition and standardized testing. So the Griffon was subjected to field trialing, and then the French took them over. The Canadians really got into them because of that French connection. So there's a lot of Griffs in Canada. And then the Americans got a hold of them. They're one of the first kind of core grouse breeds. So the Gordon Setter, the Griffon, the German wire hair, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was, are kind of the first dogs that were used to point and hunt rough grouse for pointing dogs ever. And then the setter and pointer were introduced. The setter really took off, and then the pointer, you know, became more dominant as field trialing in America. So point being, we adapt these dogs in certain ways. So my dog's from Wisconsin. He was from grouse country, you know, like his father was a field trial dog, you know, that was a field trial champion. You know, there were certain things in there, you know, and these were grouse trials. So point being, that's not, you get those connections and those adaptations. So I'm sure some of it's bred into him. You know, you're favoriting that dog that was obviously a better hunter or had better skills. I mean, that's why these trialing and these testing systems exist, so that you're breeding and accentuating that behaviors, you know, over the course of time. So you end up with this. So yeah, I mean, it's in it again, like you can even, German Shorthairs are an unfortunate example of a dog that's too popular. It's like the 9th most popular dog in the United States, and that's outside of hunting. Wow. So you get a lot of non-hunting breeding, meaning like you're not breeding with a purpose. Yep. And this is the same with show dogs. You know, you're not breeding for hunting traits, you're breeding for show traits. So you distinctively run into a lot of problems when these things happen. Think the Weimaraner. That's what destroyed the Weimaraner, is they dressed them up in clothes and put them on Sesame Street, and then everybody wanted to own one. Right. You know, so these are the things that kind of destroy these dogs. So when you have a dog as popular as the German Shorthair, unless you're making the effort to understand that you're getting that dog from generational of hunting breeding, where they're being subjected to, whether it's NAVDA or a Deutsch Kurzhaar, which is being subjected to a German system, or you know, whatever it might be, then ultimately you can end up with some bad things. I mean, some of those dogs can be pretty neurotic. I mean, unfortunately, you know, I've seen great short hairs. Don't get me wrong. I've seen some exceptional short hairs. But I've seen a lot of neurotic ones too. And that's, again, when you have this effect of non-hunting culture coming in, which is a really interesting cultural conversation of itself, about how like non-hunting culture can actually ruin something, you know, like you can have these kind of corruptions. So, you know, you don't get that as much. Like setters aren't necessarily like, there's not a lot of people just casually owning setters, you know, like it's not. So even Griffons, they're definitely becoming more popular. I know the breed index has grown like exponential percentage in the past 10 years. And so that's not necessarily a good thing, but so you'll see that break. I mean,
so interesting. But it's interesting with the unintended consequences of breeding, where, you know, for instance, like I'm sure they weren't selecting for like extra drooling and particularly floppy ears, but these are like things that come along with the traits that made Plot hounds good bear dogs or whatever. And I was just reading this morning about Cahokia, which was like one of the original civilizations that came up, in the Mississippi Valley. Okay. And so they were up in like the St. Louis area, and, you know, they had a city sort of like Teotihuacan, like big pyramid city up there, and they had domesticated a suite of plants, and we're just sort of learning that this was even there because it was kind of gone by the time Europeans got here. Right. And they excavated a chamber where they found 14 what they assumed to be sort of like elites. And they ran genetic testing on them and found they all like shared a common ancestor. So they were like inbreeding in order to maintain their lineage. Right. And most of these 14, didn't say how many, but most of them had 6 toes on one of their feet. Wow. And it's like, or you probably have heard about European royalty where they started to get like excessively long noses and earlobes because they were inbreeding and those traits become recessive. And so it's like, that's where you start to get these, because you look at some of these dogs and they've got some weird features, you know, that are a result of, well, what we really wanted was that nose, but we ended up with like all this other stuff too, you know? Totally. So it's like fascinating to me. So tell me about Project Upland, because the magazine's beautiful.
Thank you.
Very nice. It's like the kind of magazine that you keep a collection of because it's, the quality of it's so high. You wouldn't exactly throw it out, that's for sure. Beautiful, very photography forward. Yeah. Great recipes. Even the advertisements seem like really curated. What's the story here? Like, how long have you been a part of this, and what's the story?
Yeah, so I founded Project Upland. Going to be 10 years this coming in 2024. And it first started, I was just shooting some films about grouse hunting, and if anybody's ever tried to film grouse hunting, they know how insanely difficult it is. And that challenge, I just love a challenge. So I was like, oh, I'm totally doing this because it's just such a, you know, ridiculous idea. So I did that, and I actually got contacted by, at the time, the regional director of the Rough Grouse Society, and he was like, oh, I saw some of your films that you put up. Like, these are like really cool. Like, you want to come make some more? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like he's like, you know, we'll pay for your hotel room, like show up here, whatever. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, I just wanted to do something cool. So I made like all these films that just promoted the rough grouse society, people joining RGS, which, their mission is cutting trees and creating, diverse forest. Because as you know, in New England, one of the biggest things we struggle with is that early successional growth. So that's kind of the age diversity class that's most at risk, especially Southern New England. So I went around and for like
in other words, they're attempting to create that early successional growth, which is good habitat for
rough grouse and woodcock and near tropical.
I mean, I'm assuming because this whole neighborhood you're in now, everything here is, was cut pretty heavily in the last several, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Yep. And so there's a lot of birds here.
Yeah, I told you when I was driving in, I started rubbernecking and I was like, there are birds here.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can imagine the variety of songbirds you see here. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's a direct, correlation to that too. So, so it's something that a lot of species need. So that's like their mission. They work on this, forestry habitats, healthy forests, forest diversity. So there's a place in there for mature forests too, but that's this kind of sweet spot of having 15 to 20% early successional growth is what they find themselves most often having to fight for. But so I started going around and doing these things, and I just volunteered my time and made all these films, and it was fun. And then I got contacted by who's now my former business partner, and was pretty much like, oh, you can monetize this. And I'm not necessarily the most positively capitalistic person. I'm not really
another way you run counterculture to typical typical hunting world.
You grow up on the system and below the poverty level, and you form different opinions. So we started turning it into a business and got people to sponsor on these films, and I did the website. I had started the website back ages ago, and I would just write things that appealed to me. I always liked writing, so obviously with deer I was already writing, so now I just wanted to write about my thing I liked, that I was passionate about, and that's it. Just a simple outlet of like, I love this and I just want to express myself with no kind of grander vision. And eventually it did turn into a business, and 5 years ago this year, 2018, fall of 2018 would have been the first issue. And so
you guys decide you're going to pivot to a magazine.
Yeah, and dude, you would have laughed because the conversations were everything you'd expect from me. Because we did have some people that consulted with us, and I was just like, yeah, no, like I want like a skate zine. I was like, no, like the flyers we handed out at like punk rock shows that you stapled and folded. That's what I want to do, but for bird hunting.
Xeroxed, hand drawn.
Yeah, and so like. I wanted to do, the higher quality just because for that love of art, but the edge, that idea of just kind of doing it to express things and to share things was a motivation. That was the motivation. It wasn't about, oh, is Ford going to advertise with us? Is how much money you can make it? I mean, obviously in the business side, my business partner that's where he was in the world for sure. And so there were a lot of things that it was always kind of a push and take between him and I about how far capitalistic it would go and how much it wouldn't. And I've always been strong in the of the saying no to advertisers. Don't do exclusives. I'm not going to put an advertorial article in. You can't pay to get an article in our magazine or the website or something like that. And it's something that's ongoing because obviously resources cost money and time, so it's
also just your print quality. It's got to be pretty expensive.
And my whole basis from the beginning has always been it's about the community. It's about the subscriber. It's not I'm beholden to the subscriber. I'm not beholden to an advertiser. And we've lost a lot of advertisers and said no to a lot of advertisers because of that. And that got accentuated. We had a big kind of business change up in the past. Be actually a year ago this month. So March 1st of 2022 formed what's now called Project Upland Media Group. And there was my new business partner is very much of the same cloth of me, of less capitalistic motivation, more doing the things that we either feel care about because we want to express ourselves in certain ways, or just fascinated by that search for knowledge, and then in the opposite, I'm very active in, over the top, maybe, and sometimes for conservation. So legislation, political activism around that world, just all that kind of stuff in general. And so we've more so than ever have leveraged the platform for those things. And, we lose sponsors because, we have a reputation for not caring what side of the political aisle things fall on. And we tend to be involved in a lot of left-leaning stuff, which has hurt the brand, meaning we lose people.
It's so unusual in hunting.
Yeah.
It's just for whatever reason, it's so unusual.
It is. Yeah. Right. And politicians are politicians. And I think you don't need to add a R or D to that to understand they're politicians. So point being, that's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
So, I found kind of this opportunity to really educate on things and get access. Project Upland gave us access, which is something I didn't have before, because people do look at the magazine and they respect it. They see our films and they respect it. So we got access to people who could give us the inside scoop on things, tell us, let us be involved, You're
talking about in conservation legislation and stuff like that.
We've been involved a lot on the federal level for stuff, and whatnot, and getting these opportunities to talk to people and even influence things. Because, sometimes, we do live in a world that's pretty divided. So it's they don't think about the fact that, hey, when you go straight isolationist, when it's everybody's a member of Antifa, now suddenly there's nobody in the room speaking any of your reason. And that's a really bad thing, actually, I loved your last episode of your podcast. You really took the guardrails off with Donnie Vincent, which Donnie Vincent inspired the first Project Upland films.
Oh, okay.
So
his art did?
Oh my God, dude. I'd look at his films and be like, this is so
That's
awesome.
That's a guy who just went his own way too, right?
And I feel so much emotion about this. And I just loved it. I was like, I want to do this for bird hunting. And that was, what inspired me way in the beginning.
Oh, that's cool.
So point being, it's these ideas of, not having to be in a cookie cutter position.
Yeah.
It's no secret. I worked for the Biden administration to write conservation policy. I was in a room my biggest reason I wanted to be there is say, hey, we need to cut trees. You know what this administration's doing in our national forest right now? Cutting trees. And I wasn't the only voice that was saying that, but I had an opportunity to get in there and say that. Got to cut trees, got to cut trees, got to cut trees. And that was important to me, and I got that opportunity. I currently sit on the Fish and Game Commission in the state of New Hampshire. I was appointed by a Republican governor. So point being, it's not, people want to paint it as some box of politics. Do I vote more often in one direction than the other? Sure. Doesn't mean I'm not willing to, work both sides, but kind of this, I wish we lived in kind of more of this gray area. I wish we were all in the gray area.
We used to, kind of, right?
We did. I thought we did. Honestly, I think I got blindsided by it a bit, but that's naivety, I think. But so point being, Project Upland gave us those things, so we were able to do that. Now in the past year, we've been able to, we donate a massive amount of our resources straight to nonprofits, so in habitat organizations. So advertising space, we block out about a third of our advertising space specifically to conservation groups. We're sold out of everything else. So I could make more money by selling those positions. We have chose not to, and give those resources up. If, as some of these organizations working towards certain pieces of legislation or stuff, there's some things that they can't say that we can. I'm definitely known to be a bull in a china shop when I have an opinion on something, and that's sometimes you need a sledgehammer, so
right tool for the job.
Yeah, exactly. And so you got to drive passion behind something. You got to have somebody say the controversial things, and Project Upland's given us that opportunity. And Jennifer, my business partner, has very similar ideals in that regard. So this past year I found myself saying no to more sponsors. It was the first year we turned around, or I should say advertisers, because we've never had sponsors because we are an editorial. I'd say we said no to, God, I'm not going to put a monetary figure on it, but a lot. And it was because they'd say things like, oh, so we have, these articles coming out in all these other magazines and we want one to come out in yours. And it was just that was the end of the conversation. It's just yeah, dude, that's not what we are. We want to if I want to leave something behind, it's that
Legacy, you mean?
Yeah, like that's, for me, it's definitely about legacy, but that legacy can mean different things. It could mean, I don't know, you pass on a bloodline of bird dogs that's you know, phenomenally successful.
But when you say, if I leave something behind, you mean in that sense,
so
like...
I want to leave a legacy behind of inspiring new generations of, and I don't even want to say conservationists, I want to say activists, to say this is enough, draw the line in the sand, enough of this partisanship stuff that we do where it's suddenly because of their political beliefs, and now it's an extreme. You know, we just, and everybody always said that conservation was never going to be touched by that it was going to be the last bipartisan place we meet, and it's not. And
well, it's got the word conserve in it, so it's already like.
Well, and I agree too. Conserve, I don't even think we should use the word conserve, because conserve implies that eventually it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think we should be thinking about it from the word of sustainability.
Yeah, exactly.
How does it go on perpetually?
Like perpetuity.
You know, like I'm a
perpetuitist.
Yeah, like so that's kind of like how I look at it too. But point being is there are people on both sides of the aisles that want to get these things done, and
you know, that's so, like, you say that like nonchalantly, but like I don't know that people know that. I mean, when you spend time, for me, coming into hunting was really interesting, because I was like, oh wow, everybody's so conservative here, and and that's just generally what I've encountered. And so when we were at that live podcast, I remember like right off being like, wow, this guy sounds kind of lefty, this is really unusual to me. Not that I'm like shocked that there would be a person who hunts that feels like that, but that somebody as involved as you.
Right.
That's what was neat. It was like, oh wow, this guy's got a seat at the table. He's publishing this magazine. He's written this book on taking big whitetails. Like, not somebody you'd expect to espouse anything but sort of the typical what you hear in hunting, which is mostly kind of old world conservative kind of values. So that was really eye-opening to me, actually.
And I think, you know, we talked about this before we turned the mics on. I'm an industry outsider at the end of the day. I didn't come up through another company.
Right.
In fact, the door was slammed on me every time. You know, like I'll never forget an editor from an unnamed publication told me, do yourself a favor and just give up writing now. And so ironically,
that's the best when someone says shit like that.
Totally. And you know, in his defense, I needed really good editors because I am a absolute hack of the English language. So, but point being, you know, I could never break into the, you know, and I honestly, I don't think I necessarily ever really tried. I never wanted to be like, I want to work in the hunting industry. Like that was never, you know, like I just like, kind of just want to do cool things, and like that was it. And wherever those whims took me, you know, like really recklessly in a way. That's just kind of how I always did things. But so point being, I'm an industry outsider, which is, you know, the problem, and I think some of us are too young to remember, is that this industry has witch hunted people with my politics. And it has actively been attempted on me. The difference is that I own my company and I'm not going to fire myself.
Right.
You know, but there are people who won't advertise with us because of my political involvements. But the irony is nobody asked me the question like, but are you pro-gun?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, believe it or not, I can actually be pro-gun and still be registered in a party that you associate with the anti-gun movement. You know, because it's just like this idea that, again, we're trying to put ourselves in these little boxes of like this is our little square of like
rah-rah team.
Yeah. And it's, unfortunately, it gives us horse blinders. And what I think is particularly unfortunate is we actually look at what happens if you look at legislation. If you actually take the time, which first of all, no normal person is going to take up the time to like read through a bill, try to understand it, and then go look at the vote roll and see where the party falls. But like what I can tell you, if you did put that weight in, there is one party voting for conserving this country's wild spaces, and it's not the one that the hunting industry thinks it is. And my fear for that is that also means that hunters are uninvolved. I mean, think about how dangerous that actually is, because now you don't have those people.
Well, the messaging has been like, oh, just by your hunting license, you're involved. Just by your duck stamp, you're involved. And it's almost like sometimes a little embarrassing when you hear people saying
the bare
like,
minimum.
Yeah, but they often think, because they've been educated to think that this is involved.
And I don't even think that was, we have an article that's about to come out on this very thing, because there's obviously this real big pushback right now about hunter recruitment. And I'm going to put it straight. People that are very loud bitching about hunter recruitment right now, because there are people who have fame behind their name. There are people that are getting angry because of draw odds on tags or overcrowding in hunting spaces. Honestly, like, they're playing a game of checkers when a game of chess is afoot. Mm-hmm. And what people don't realize, and I learned this at very fast pace once I became a commissioner, almost every state agency is underfunded for state fish and game or DNR. So I'm not talking all state agencies like Department of Transportation, whatever else. So I will tell you, when a budget gets cut, the DNR and fish and game are the first to go. And that's if they were lucky to get general fund money in the first place. So point being, the people that actually have the biggest direct impact on the creation of habitat, the management of our wildlife, the research, the data collection, all of these things are the most underfunded government organizations. Virtually no access to general funds. So their path is Pittman Robinson, PR. And PR requires us to match money, and there's this super complex formula, and it's not as cut and dry.
And just for the listener, this is meaning going after federal funds because you're not getting state funds.
So essentially, for every $1 a state, I'm going to simplify this, for every $1 a state spends, they get $4 from the federal government. That's ultimately how our system, and that is thank you to Pittman Robinson, which Pittman Robinson is a taxation essentially on guns and ammunition that comes back in. Right now, we're experiencing a boom on that finances because of the boom of the gun industry, which is great for conservation money, but it also makes it very unstable, which is something that people have talked about on both sides of the political spectrum in all different ways. But what happens even in that regard is the only thing a state agency has that they can control is selling a hunting license. Because in order to match that money, they need to sell more hunting licenses.
That's why the big push on that.
So when people
I've always wondered, because it doesn't seem like much money, like in the hunting licenses. Well,
and that's, again, you turn $1 into $5 essentially. Yeah. But also look at it this way. It's like, it's literally their only revenue and they're self-funded. So this is the thing. It's like people that are very loud about being against hunter recruitment. And I agree, there are growing problems. It sucks when your spot's overrun. It sucks when it's impossible to draw a tag. It sucks when you might see people in a younger generation projecting things in ways they shouldn't because maybe they're completely new to hunting and they don't have somebody being like, yo, dude, don't do that. I mean, I think about like turkey hunt's a perfect example. You roll up into a hunting spot and, somebody beat you there to where the turkeys were roosted. Well, if you didn't grow up hunting or around other hunters, nobody's there to tell you like, okay, dude, like that's it. Sorry, early bird gets the worm. Roll onto a new spot. Like that's the way this is done. These are the unspoken rules of the woods. So you get these kind of conflicts with older generation hunters and these newer hunters that are just like finding their way through the darkness blindly. So you get all these things, but what people they're hyper focusing on it, and it's a symptom. Yeah. It's not the problem. The problem is not that the problem is that they're underfunded in the first place. And you want to talk about saving our wildlife. Well, this is the money that's needed to do it. Yeah. If you think that a habitat project is going to get done, just because of the goodwill of a general fund from a governor, well, then I don't know what you're smoking, because both Democrats and Republicans cut those budgets. Yeah. That's just the way it goes. Yeah. So point being, what particularly bothers me about this topic is we've had outs. Recovering America's Wildlife Act, RAWA, which is something that I worked very passionately on to try to get passed, failed. Recovering American Wildlife Act is an amendment to Pittman Robinson to create a whole other funding source that's more stable. So the money is set to a specific base always. It never changes from that amount, because we get this fluctuation with gun sales. You get a Democratic president, gun sales go way up. You get a Republican, gun sales dip, all these different things. So point being, it stabilizes a base funding source. It also would have created certain accesses that are sometimes the biggest hindrance for state agencies. So some states, the biggest amount of money they're spending is on search and rescue and law enforcement. So that's law enforcement handles search and rescue. That's taken up 60+% of some state budgets. Of that
Pittman Robinson or of the state budget?
No, because they can't even access Pittman Robinson money.
Oh, it's of the state budget.
Yeah, so for that department's budget. Yeah. So point being, RAWA would have actually given access to some of that money to be subsidized. So your most expensive part of an organization would have been paid for. This ultimately would have been, the last iteration would have connected it to legal actions around environmental issues. So somebody does something messed up, oil company has a spill, there's fees paid, those fees go into this fund, this RAWA fund, and ultimately gets distributed. And I think it was 1.4 billion or 1.3 billion dollars a year. So point being, and then it gets distributed on formulaic systems throughout the country. So what that would have done is actually, if it had been passed, and the very people loudest about this never spoke about RAWA, which just tells me the fact that they're so in touch with the problem in the first place. Like, if that had passed, states would be less desperate to recruit new hunters. Right. So there is an act that actually did pass. I want to say it was 2019. We passed the updated Pittman-Robertson. It was like the Modernization Act, which allowed them to actually access money for R3, ironically. And essentially it was like, hey, listen, like, we're having struggling matching money. We're having trouble like doing these things. We need to modernize Pittman-Robertson so we can access this money, because before they could only do it for habitat work.
Oh, so this is why in the time that I've come into it, I've noticed such an uptick in the R3 stuff.
Correct. There's now federal money.
Retainment, reactivation, because they've had federal funds.
Yeah, so now Pittman-Robertson can be accessed,
which allows them to then sell more hunting licenses.
Which then allows them to
match
money.
More dollars. What happens with... Okay, so the Democratic Party's pretty associated with gun control, even though, like, as you mentioned before, it doesn't mean that at an individual level it is.
Totally.
It's incredibly ironic to me that AR-15 and Glock 19 sales are driving conservation money.
Absolutely.
But that's kind of, when you look at the gun culture, generally speaking, what people are buying, it's not, I would say it's probably a lot more non-hunting guns and ammunition than it is, right? So, but it doesn't matter. It's all that money, still 11% or whatever, goes into Pittman-Robertson. So if that party were to chip away and draw down on access to these firearms, there isn't really a fallback to where this money would come from, right? And so that's one of these unintended consequences. Like, the average anti-gun person definitely doesn't understand that if they were to get their way and all these guns started to go away, that the dollars that go towards making sure there's animals on the landscape would also go away. So there's like this, it's so strange, right, how this works. So how do you pick that apart? Like, how do you see that, like, long term? Because this seems super unsustainable to me. That and I'm somebody, I like those kind of guns. I like that kind of shooting. I enjoy all that stuff. But these are very different worlds. Like that, it's just so strange to me. I mean, that'd be like, if car sales are what funded there being elk, in Colorado. That's just like, what? How does that relate? Totally. So like, how does that all work? Because my impression is, okay, like, I know a lot of those Molon Labe, come take it from my cold dead hands people, right? I'm not one of those people. Like, I love the sentiment, but I just don't think that's realistic. I think over time we're gonna see a drawdown, starting probably with, the so-called assault weapons, and then eventually to large capacity handguns. And then before you know it, you can have like a bolt action gun, maybe, and a shotgun or something. Yeah. So if that were to happen, is there much talk about that you've encountered? Like, how that's good? Is that just something people are just kicking that can down the road?
Well, I think part of it is, I think what some people miss is that America has not always been assault weapon obsessed.
Yeah.
So-called
assault weapon.
Yeah, what's that?
So-called assault weapon.
So yeah, black gun.
Sure.
I prefer the term black gun for sure. So America hasn't always
been
black.
They look nice and tan.
Yeah, they do, right? Yeah, camoed, you name it. Yeah, totally. I definitely like gunmetal. But anyway, so this concept of this disproportionate, what we've seen has actually only happened with this kind of cultural meltdown we're having right now. Yeah. So if you go to like pre-identity politics, our world did exist where that wasn't, because let's face it, if you go to a gun range and you're shooting a pallet of 223s, you are funding conservation.
Yeah, right.
So my 4 boxes of 28 gauges are not, at my weekly range trip are not funding conservation. So there is, I agree, and this is part of this thing, is like these honest conversations of like, I will be the first to say, yeah, the black gun crowd is footing
they don't know it. It's not like that's the other.
Yeah, I think SIG, New Hampshire company.
Okay, some people, SIG knows it, but I'm saying the average guy who's like, I need to get me an AR-15. He doesn't know that, right. That's what's also funny, because having been in that world, that doesn't come up. Like when you're doing like a tactical training or 3-gun competition, no one's talking about conservation.
You know how many grouse this put on the landscape?
Exactly. Today? Like, thanks, John Wick. We appreciate all that conservation money. So that's like not even, they don't even know. Yeah. They don't see that fee's been tacked on. So it's like the people paying for fun, because like I said before, sometimes I feel it's a little disingenuous when hunters go like, well, we're the ones paying for all the conservation. It's like, you're just buying a hunting license for $30 a year, man. It's not that big of a contribution.
And it's the required by law. Like being a conservationist feels like you need to take an extra step.
Exactly.
I did more than just required by law.
Than what I needed to do to be able to hunt, right? But then the people who are paying the most are, like I just mentioned, they rarely even know they are.
No idea.
So there's a major disconnect there. And then the people who are attacking the funding source usually really want the conservation too, but don't know that they're attacking the funding source. Yep. So this just seems like it's going to sink.
And I think the other irony of this, because we're just talking about like all these like really partisanship, bipartisan, like just contradictions. I think this is something that the industry would never let you know. You hang around at Pittman Robinson, this great thing, like it was part of the most liberal agenda in U.S. history. It was part of the New Deal. Yeah. Like it was a law that was literally in the New Deal, and it was celebrated. And it was Democrats that pushed it through. Don't get me wrong. Hunters wanted it. Hunters were all about it. I'm not saying there were Republicans that supported it. It wasn't like it was a partisan vote. It was leaned in one direction for sure, but the irony of if you spend any time in the actual hunting industry, nobody's going to let you know that, oh, by the way, the fun that we worship on the altar it was a part of a socialist agenda, And I think the irony of American conservation is that the success of our system is the more we've isolated hunting from capitalism, the better our wildlife has done, like the more socialist our agenda has been, the more success we've had. And I mean, some of that pendulum's blown back in our face, like, as deer overpopulated, like there's some things that got out of hand, and again, this is about like honest conversations. And this is my thing. If like, we're going to tote ourselves as conservationists, like as hunters, when this whole like hunting is conservation movement, which like, honestly, I don't think anybody in like the biologists that are like sitting there doing the like, how do we raise our money and funding? Like, this is not their fault. This is like somebody else's fault on like TikTok or something. Like, like that's just like, this sounds good, like, so like, but point being, it's like, we're missing so much of the picture, because being a conservationist should be always facing the honest truth. This idea that, okay, like, we do actually need to hunt deer to like extravagant levels in certain parts of the country. We need to do insane things to get those populations done, because the environmental degradation as a result of the overpopulation of whitetail is probably really the biggest crisis of biodiversity in our country right now. Like, sure, climate change is a thing, but like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, climate change is happening, like, it's just happening, period. And the only thing we know to in the wildlife space is habitat. Create more habitat. That's like literally the only tool we have is just create more habitat. Well, deer are uncreating habitat actively. Right. So like, point being, like, we don't want to have that honest conversation. And then like, I look at some things, and this is sometimes what's like.
But then sorry to jump in here, but the departments are worried if they don't. It's like they need to create deer hunting opportunities, or they can't sell the hunting licenses,
so
which
the
allow them to access the federal dollars, which they need if they want to do anything for habitat. So
absolutely,
it's kind of like,
it's still a commodity. There's still a capitalistic commodity and drive there. And it's true. And this is kind of to my thing of like, what deer hunter is going to be like, yeah, oh my God, there was too many deer out there today. You know, like it's not like, and unfortunately that's the thing is none of this stuff definitely directs into like I now have a great, like there's some hard truths. And I believe that this is the thing. Hunting survives not because of laws passed or whatever else. It is purely going to survive on how we handle ourselves as a culture. Do the public look at us and say those people suck? That's honestly, you want to talk about the fight to ban black guns? That has nothing to do with like we talk about amendments and rah 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 and it doesn't matter. Well, it's like as soon as you showed up carrying guns across people exercising their First Amendment right, and I'm sorry, intimidation is actively suppressing number one, which came before number two. Now you've created a cultural ecosystem that is not working in your favor. My point being is guns will get banned because of gun owners. Hunting will get banned because of hunters. These are direct. And the hard thing is what's our reaction to that? It's the Second Amendment. I'll do what I want. And I'm going to do it even more now to show you that I can do whatever I want because it's my right. And I understand those feelings. So point being, I'm saying that. So hunting, a similar thing where you say these things of like, well, I'm going to do these things over the top. Like it is my, so, and I look at something like, for instance, lead ammunition is like my prime example. Literally the last industry in the world to have not banned lead is the hunting industry, period. And I'm not saying...
And the vehemence with which people defended in that world.
Right. And I'm not saying, again, I don't necessarily believe in a lead ban. Like, I just hope people are just good. And like...
Peer pressure.
Yeah,
basically.
but like point being like shooting at a range where we can recapture it, where we know this thing's for war, law enforcement. Understand it, like I don't think we're worried about the lead distribution when somebody can technically put off a tactical nuke, So point being like these places, okay, but like hunters, we can make those choices not to. And I'm sorry, like there is literally zero conclusive science that says that lead is not damaging to the environment.
Right.
But there are a lot of peer-reviewed conclusive studies saying that lead is actively destructive to the environment. And more important, what people don't realize is there are studies that can actually, so for instance, we cited one in an article recently. I found this study that was done in Wisconsin about woodcock. What do woodcock eat? Earthworms. And this is your episode on earthworms, by the way. I'm just like still nerding out over it. But what earthworms do, they absorb heavy metals. So what happened in the study is they found that these woodcock in traditional hunting grounds had excessive amounts of lead in their blood. And in fact, what would be lethal for waterfowl. And they were surviving, but they had these to the points of questioning the toxicity of a human eating one.
Right.
So this happened. And what's interesting about this, because again, this is everybody's debates. They want to say there's no conclusive. There is all sorts of conclusive studies. But what's most important is they can actually isolate, and I this might be the wrong word if I remember correctly, but the isotope of the lead to know that it was man-made lead.
Yeah.
So it was man-altered lead.
Right.
So point being, they know definitively it is man-altered lead that has gotten into these earthworms and then into these woodcock and have created this thing. I am sorry, if that doesn't make you stop shooting lead, like you can't call yourself a conservationist.
Yeah.
Like it's just, I'm sorry. It's just like, there's not, so my point is that and what's going to get like, and to my point is you go to Europe and in England, it was hunters that ultimately ended up pinching the government to ban lead, and that had to do with market hunters. They were just essentially sick of market hunters putting lead all over the landscape. But point being, like in America, instead of like the hunters doing the right thing, and this is my thing, we're in the public eye. Like we should be like the canary in the coal mine on everything because we're in it. We're part of the ecosystem. Like, and I'm really big on that. Like hunters are a natural part of the ecosystem. And just like it's wrong to remove another predator, it's wrong to remove us as a predator. And like, but point being, we should be out there and sounding those alarms.
Yeah, self-regulating.
And we should be saying, oh, hey, as the dude who's been in the wilderness for the past year, I've come out for a moment to let everybody know lead is bad. Yeah. Like, and then the rest of society looks at you and goes, look at those stand-up guys.
Yeah,
Look at that stand-up community of like, they really do care about the wildlife.
Right,
Like, but that's not what we're doing.
Oh, it's fascinating because there's so many things about this, because I've been sounding this alarm as well. And one of the stories I hear all the time, well, back up. If you were going to caricaturize the hunter versus caricaturize the hardcore leftist. Okay, if you're going to caricaturize the hardcore leftist, typically people know that the caricature is a high IQ individual, sometimes who's so obsessed with minutia that they lose the forest for the trees, but nobody goes like, oh yeah, those dumb leftists. They sometimes will characterize them as having arrived at insane conclusions, but nobody thinks of, they're considered the most literate and educated amongst us. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Now, when you caricaturize the right, there tends to be that kind of, what is caricaturized are also the symptoms of lead toxicity, which is a lowered IQ and aggression.
This is harsh, man.
Those are two symptoms of lead exposure: lowered IQ and excessive aggression. And then when you go into the world of tactical shooting or hunting, it's not like you can't find lots of anecdotal examples of what appear to be lowered IQ and excessive aggression. So I know that's just anecdotal, but it's kind of like what I hear a lot of is like, I've been shooting it my whole life and I had no effects on me. And it's like, are you sure?
Well, and I remember being a kid and how obsessive my father was about us washing our hands after handling ammunition.
Dude, I know. I watch people, I'd be at the range doing like a 3-day class or something, and you're shooting all day, and then dudes are just eating lunch, and it's like you see their fingers are like silver, like pewter colored, you know? And then also, like even if you're shooting a jacketed bullet, let's say, like the back of that bullet is exposed lead, and that's being exposed to all the heat of those gases, which is creating volatility, which means that you're inhaling, and a lot, especially shooting something like an AR where where the charging handle is there, you get puffs of smoke. And then if you suppress that weapon, now it's blowing right back in your face. You're breathing lead,
Yeah.
And then of course, like, with a 22, like that's just a copper plating. That's not even a jacket on that. So you've got a lot.
Yeah, you can pinch that head with your fingers and put a dent in it pretty much. Yeah.
Every time you're loading, magazines, you're in contact with this. It's in the primers of a lot of ammunition. So you're getting, the more you shoot, the more exposure you're getting. And then, some pretty good research too showing that micro fragments of that lead can spread pretty far from the wound cavity into the meat. It ends up in the grind. It ends up in the steaks. I mean, people are consuming this stuff. If we hunt, we get exposed to a lot of lead. And so, my concern is that the more lead you've been exposed to, the more likely you are to think you haven't been, because your cognition is effective and you get aggressive towards any kind of confrontation. And I just see that a lot.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of the people I talk to tell me, well, I grew up smelting lead in my garage.
Yeah,
and it's dude, that's standing over the pot of liquid lead, breathing vapor, So I think we really need to move away from this. I think that's a really good example. And as you mentioned, it's a bad look to be there trying to promote it.
And even, obviously I do things very much through the lens of grouse and woodcock hunting. Specifically, because that's how I identify, as a grouse hunter, not a bird hunter, like, sure, do I go out and hunt birds throughout the country?
That's your pronouns, but, or grouse hunter.
Yeah, that's my pronouns. I'm a grouse hunter, so grouse and woodcock hunter. Point being, we past the fact that, we already know there are bad things happening for the woodcock and the worms. We also know that when it gets in the water, it's really bad.
Yeah.
And we know that factually. Again, all of the science, there's no study to counter this. And this is what's very important where people, they want to cite that it's all like made up, and it's not. And these studies have been done throughout the world with governments that don't have motives, or not nonprofits or some scientific whatever that don't have a motive, because everything, is a conspiracy. And point being, we know definitely with the water. So, like, have you ever walked in a grouse or woodcock cover and not seen water in the Northeast?
No.
there's a lot of water. There's a lot of trout streams.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bugs. There's a lot
vernal
of
pools.
Beaver. Yeah, there's just all these things. And you're telling me when you raise that gun, duck hunters aren't allowed to do it.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not. And then people just want to jump to these. Oh, this person wants to ban this and ban that.
They're coming for our guns.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, it doesn't have to be about a ban. It can be about socially responsible activity as a community.
That's what Judy Camuso told me. She's the commissioner for Maine. When you guys say commissioners in New Hampshire, there's that's plural, right?
Yeah, so there's 11 commissioners.
Okay, so Judy's the head of Inland Fish and Wildlife for Maine, so singularly at the top.
Well, yeah, so it's the board. It's essentially a board of directors that oversees.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
There's an executive director who's in charge of New Hampshire Fish and Game, and then there's the commission, which is essentially like a board of directors.
Okay, so what they told me in New Hampshire was that because they had asked me to write a little social media piece about hunting with copper. Because I've just had amazing results with the Barnes TSX stuff. I mean, just think that's an amazing bullet. And, I just decided to experiment with it and was like, yep, immediately switching away. So anyway, she told me that they don't want to ban it, that they just want to create a kind of social pressure.
Yep.
And I agree with that approach.
I do too.
I do think that one of the issues is that when you look at why people hunt, one of the things that always comes up is heritage. So when people are big on heritage, they're probably big on not wanting to change. That's just those things seem kind of go hand in hand. Another thing is it's expensive, and a lot of people are sitting on a shit ton of ammunition that they've stored up over a lifetime.
Me, dude, I've got cases, man.
Yeah,
like my father was hoard buying ammunition when I was like 5,
right?
And
so all that,
yeah.
Then you've got the fact that, I mean, with shotguns, this is obviously much less of an issue, but with your rifles, it's, every gun that I have is married to a round that it fires, and if I'm going to change that round, now I've got to change my zero, which means I've got to shoot a box of this stuff to get. So now I got to buy enough copper ammunition that I can sight the gun in and still have enough to hunt with for the next few years. So.
Which is more expensive.
And it's more expensive. And so I can see how people, it's just a basic psychological thing. It's like, it's easier to just resist it. Sometimes people are like, well, I'll just make a bunch of noise because I don't want to have to do all those things. And man, life's busy. You know that thing today where like every company wants, you go to the gas station, it's like, well, do you have the rewards points account? And, every airline wants you to have their credit card, and every website it's now every streaming channel, there's 50 of them now, right? It used to be like, okay, you got your cable package. Now everybody's their own streaming service. They all want $6 to $12 a month. And it gets to where you're like, man, how am I supposed to manage all of this stuff? And so then, people are really overwhelmed. And then it's like, okay, now you also, by the way, this is going to change. This thing that you've always done the same way since you were a little kid, that you learned from granddaddy, who learned it, gave it to daddy, who gave it to you. It's like, we don't want to change. So I do understand that perspective, but I mean, the idea that you are going to expose your kids to some, and I also think too, like, if you want guns not to go away, I have always thought it's going to be easier to regulate ammunition than it is to get guns away from American people.
Yeah. Which is just never going to happen. I'm sorry.
That'd be really hard to do.
There's never going to be a time where we're going house to house and taking guns. Like, that is a conspiracy theory.
No, but you could draw them down over time.
You could buy back. People might. Somebody passes away. They get rid of the guns.
Non-transferable. Yep, exactly. All these things.
There are things.
But what you can definitely do is dry up ammunition.
Right.
And we see that half the time when that happens, it's the people who want the ammunition that are drying it up, not the anti-gun people. It's the gun people who dry it up. But I've always been concerned that the EPA could be the route through which to make ammunition go away, because the stuff is a known it's not in gasoline anymore.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the gasoline comment earlier, which is like always my go-to. Like, literally, we can't put it in gasoline.
Exactly.
Which is inherently something that's already toxic. We also cannot add this more toxic substance to it.
Right, exactly. We'll put other toxic things in it. But yeah, so I've always worried that it would come through that like, well, you can't shoot it because it's toxic. And so which makes me want to more rapidly embrace alternatives,
I agree. The interesting thing about this, and again, this has to do with like the industry just working against itself. I read a book by Bob Brister, who is famous for writing about shotgun ballistics and stuff like that. And The Shotgunning the Art and Science is the book. And I was reading it specifically for some stuff around an article I was working on about the 28 gauge. He was known to have loved the gauge. I personally love the gauge too. So just really trying to understand it from somebody who's smarter than me. And the last chapter in the book was written about when lead was banned for waterfowl hunting, and first started being banned on some federal lands and as test zones, and certain states agreed to do tests so they could do studies to see what kind of environmental impacts. But it's actually pretty fascinating just to read about how it kind of happened, because it's just like, we don't, we're just, at an age where we're young enough to not necessarily remember it that
I just hear stories from the old timers bitching about, I know guys who haven't picked up duck hunting again since the ban.
Because they're just so angry about it.
Still angry.
So here's an interesting thing about it. The first study that got released, which is ultimately the study that would go on to affect all hunters' opinions on the lethality. I'm sorry, how would I say that? Lethality of steel came out, and they left out, and Bob Brister blew the whistle on this, but it was too late. Damage is done, and most people don't know this today. He pointed it out. They went and took like high pressure performance lead loads and compared them to standard steel.
Oh, no way.
And then they used this as these birds are not going to be killed as effectively, and instantly formed a public opinion. What they went on to find out when they did actually do more, instead of using this, this study was done to paint a very specific picture because an industry didn't want to see something banned. Like any industry, we do these things, we don't want to be banned. We're going to fight it until the last day because we're profiting, and eventually we know we're going to lose, but damage done. So point being, they go through this whole thing. So most people don't realize that our opinion of the effectiveness of steel, and I know there's people that are going to listen to this and be like, oh, well, no. And it's like, okay, well, do it in a scientific setting and get back to me. And what you'll find is that in all studies, the effectiveness difference is only like 7%. And what they specifically showed from a scientific standpoint, because when you do science, there can only be one variable, there was actually always two variables that they didn't account for, which is that the shot size of a piece of steel, if you take a number 4 steel and a number 4 lead, the number 4 lead weighs more. Okay, well, that's actually a variable.
Yeah.
And so you're not accounting for it. So what they did was, to make the study more equal, they changed that steel size and said, okay, well, we're going to use a steel size that weighs the same amount.
So that each piece of shot is equal in weight? In
weight rather than size. And what they found was the lethality of it is almost identical.
Based on density, not based on size.
Yes, which they also found was the carried velocity of steel is actually higher than lead.
Yep.
So what's interesting about that is your downrange energy in steel shot is actually higher. But the problem that you run into, and again, because this works two ways, is when you have a larger shot size now, though, your target creates more resistance because you have more surface area. So yes, now you create another variable. The only significant difference that mattered is the reason that you have to ultimately choke down for steel. So meaning you don't shoot steel through a full choke, you shoot it through a modified choke, which gives you the effects of a full choke. That step down ultimately, what it did was create a pattern that was of a similar size to that lead. But the reality is that steel is still a tighter pattern. Hence, people miss more often. And it's not because the steel is less effective. It's because people can't shoot straight. So point being, the center mass of steel will kill a bird as effectively as the center mass of lead. So we got off on this wrong foot to begin with of this steel is just so bad. And now performance steel, think about just, how once you're forced to create something, we do it better, because we're humans and we just make things better.
Well, and there's capitalism there too, right? So exactly, it's like the new product for this year.
Totally. So point being, we got this really bad start off with steel. And then the other thing is the effect of steel on barrels. It has been, a huge topic. A lot of vintage guns can't actually handle steel. It will destroy a barrel. But even that had these effects of being blown out of proportion, you know? And ironically, it was Winchester who was the first gun company to be like, actually, some of these things we're saying are not true. And they were like, there's no Winchester shotgun built that can't handle steel.
Okay.
You know, like meaning they could all handle steel. And these things about these barrels wearing down isn't actually happening at the rate that people are saying they're happening.
Right.
So there's actually some really fascinating history that happens like in the 70s with all this stuff. So point being, we actually just started in this like super poor footing of like, you know, steel is just bad. It's harder to hit birds with. I mean, I hunted steel. I've hunted steel most of my adult life for birds. I switched over to bismuth in the past few years.
What do you shoot now for upland birds?
For rounds, I usually shoot like 6 or 7 bismuths. Not the best for woodcock. They do a lot of damage to woodcock, so you got to let them get out, which is like a general issue. I used to shoot 9 leads for woodcock, so, you know, but the thing about, and then I used to shoot 6 steel or 7 steel when I could find it. I honestly wish somebody would make like an 8-9 bismuth, because grouse and woodcock are not tough birds. Like it doesn't take much to kill one. Like you don't need to be hurling TSS at them. That's for sure. So point being, you know, steel is a really easy shot to kill an upland bird with. But you know, the point of especially because, you know, grouse hunting, you're very rarely going to have a shot past 35 yards. In fact, most of your shooting is going to happen 20 and under. So point being, like you got to take some of these variables in place. And I agree that there are some places some of these things are going to become more exasperated. You know, you shoot a tougher animal and things change. You know, you shoot at a further distance, things change. You know, all these things. But even some of those things, we got them wrong. Again, the carried velocity of steel is actually greater than you know, than what lead is. Hence why you need to choke down. Right. You know, so it's just pretty interesting to just think about how much of a bad foot we got off around the whole conversation about materials. And you know, what's funny too is, you know, it is expensive, and I don't disagree with that. But steel is cheap now. Like it is almost comparable.
Yeah, if you want the good bismuth and stuff, you're paying for that. But
and the one thing in my community that I see is you'll have some dude like be like, oh, you know, I got a vintage shotgun and you know, I can't afford to shoot, you know, bismuth out of this gun. And it's like, dude, you have like a Parker shotgun that's worth like 30 grand and you're telling me you can't afford bismuth? Like, like, come on, dude. You
going
know?
hunting in your Ford Raptor.
Yeah, and again, like, nobody's saying ban lead on ranges. Go blow lead through the thing at the ranges. We can capture it there. It's a controlled environment where we can create systems.
It's not wildlife habitat.
Yeah, to recapture, you know? Like, we're not just casually spreading a toxin into the woods, you know? Like, you know, just distribute it at random, you know? Like, and think about it. Like, I hope people would, like, think about that as the next time they pull the trigger. Like, think about, like, you just threw a burst of toxic material. Yes, it happens naturally in the environment. And where it happens naturally in the environment, everything's dead around it. So point being...
Well, it's not like you're encountering lead deposits very often. I killed both of those. Those were pretty good-sized bears, man. I killed those both with copper. I mean, it's like I just
works,
have
man.
Good faith in it. There's something interesting here about the shotguns where I'm picturing like... it's like this tabletop right here, you know, made to look like, well, maybe that really is wood. But you know what I mean? You see stuff that you're like, that's fake. My composite decking out there that's got wood grain on it. It's like so stupid to me. Or these light bulbs, which are LEDs, but they're made in the shape of
a light bulb.
Yeah, an incandescent bulb, which are now banned or whatever.
Right.
So you get this retro thing. So the idea of a 28 gauge shotgun, for instance, which I believe means if you took 1 pound of lead and you made it into 28 equal sized spheres, one of those spheres would be the diameter of the bore of the shotgun.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's what the gauge means. So like a 12 gauge.
Oh, so I thought the gauge was like literally. Oh, so you're saying the original kind of what the old G of how they created the measurement.
That's how you still could. So if you took 1 pound of pure lead and broke it into 12 equal sized spheres, that's the diameter of the bore of a 12 gauge shotgun. So as we move to copper, this becomes like an antiquated, I mean, it's pretty antiquated anyway, but now it's like a very antiquated.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Oh yeah. It's like one of the, because for me, when I first got into all this, you know, coming into it new, it's like, what does any of this mean? It's so confusing, all the gun nomenclature. So as I picked apart at it, it was like, what do these gauges mean? But yeah, that's what it means. So it's like I guess that would have made sense back in the day because you could have done that experiment at home, you know,
Right.
but today it's like, who's melting down lead into spheres
Well,
or whatever.
apparently we know some people.
Yeah, my neighbor for sure. Yeah, I guess
But
the neighbors
I mean,
do.
that's, you know, that's, I think the other thing that we've seen in our culture to kind of to this hunter recruitment thing is hunter recruitment has created this unusual pressure on the culture of people that are coming in with very different baseline ideas and they look at things differently.
Yeah.
And that has created an angst inside of the culture, an extra grumpy,
Right.
you know, response of things. And, you know, we've spent a lot of time with Project Upland. So some of the research that we've done as a brand, we were at the forefront of helping with R3. And one of the things that we were able to offer was one of the first stable data sets to look at people who are first generation hunters. And so what I mean by that is meaning, you know, when you do statistics, you need so many responses for this data set to become stable. Well, when they started looking around to like find like, okay, like who could have this information? Well, Project Upland, unknowingly, it wasn't like we started like, I didn't start making films and be like, my goal is to recruit hunters. Like, I didn't think we were going to inspire people. I didn't think that showing people that, you know, their dogs do these insane things, that I was suddenly going to get these emails that said, hey, because of your film, I went out and started taking my dog to do these things and now I'm a hunter, and I never thought I would be. We didn't go out with that intention. Those things just happened. So as a result, it created this access to this data that we didn't know we had. So like our first study that we did around this, it was like 38% of our audience that submitted responses were first generation hunters, meaning their mother or father did not hunt. And that allowed us to actually look at who those people were. And Project Upland never shied away from asking the hard questions like, what's your opinion about lead? I mean, there's literally companies that would not even utter those words out loud, never mind put them in a mass survey. You know, so we were able to, you know, drill down into some of these things. And what we've found in the data, and we've been doing this research now for it's going on at least 7 years, I think this year, is that the younger people are, the more environmentally conscious they are.
Yeah, man.
So the irony of it is that a lot of people want to paint like, I love when I hear like, oh, all these new hunters, I'm seeing shotgun shells in the woods or empty shells in the ammunition. It's like, dude, that was your grandpa.
That was
not your like.
The new hunters showed up in a Prius, dude.
Yeah. Who literally like learned to separate trash as his first, like recycling as his first tool. You know, like his first toy was like a recycling separation bin. You know, like I'm sorry, those are not the people leaving junk in the wilderness.
That's such a great point, man. Yeah. It's really true.
You know, so it's kind of funny to like how they've like wanted to pin some of these things. And what has happened, again, the example of the turkey hunter, you roll up and you don't know the ethics. You don't know the how to respect the next hunter, give them space. If they got there first, it's their spot. These kind of other things of like not really knowing, you know, and it's also like, you know, we've taught ourselves as society to like ask for help. So like it's crazy to me when like some new hunter asks like, oh, hey, like, can you tell me where to hunt? And then there's people that are like, what? I had to earn that, and like all these different things. And that's myself included. Like where I live now, I mean, I can't even track all the grouse covers I have. Not one of them did anybody drop me a pin and say, there are grouse here. It never happened. You know, like I did that with my own, you know, boot leather, you know, to get there. But point being, like, we act like it's just this like just unfathomable question. And it's just like we can still say, hey, you got to work for it. But also, like, when you were a kid, did like your father not show you where to hunt?
That's it. You know, there's a break in the lineage.
Did your grandfather tell you like, hey kid, go off and find your tree to sit under? You know, like, come on. You know, so point being, so we have to account for the fact that there's this massive information gap, and with a generation that's been taught to ask questions, and it's like, of course they're going to ask questions. And it's also okay to say, hey, you got to earn it. You know, that's okay. But point being, to make it into this big, like, offensive, this is the reason why we can't recruit
so
hunters.
stupid to
It's
me.
just like,
Because again, there's a break in the lineage. We have this thing like in the primitive skills world where people, you know, making self bows and napping stone and doing all those kind of Stone Age skills. And those guys love the idea of like, they fantasize like being dropped off naked in Alaska and they have to make everything they need to survive.
Right.
And it's like, okay, but just to be clear, in the distant past,
Yep.
you were born into a culture where all the tools were made,
Yep.
everything already existed, and you came up with stuff, and then you learned to make your stuff as you went. You didn't start off naked in the woods alone with nothing and then have to figure it out.
And
that's
had
like a
community.
That's what I'm saying. Like the community already had all the stuff. Similarly, like hunting was this thing where you came up around people who brought you out and they showed you the ways. And even today, like you don't have to take somebody to a spot, but you can tell them like, hey, this is, for instance, like with foraging, a friend of mine taught me about looking at a Google Earth map. And it's like, hey, look, if you look closely, these are oaks and these are maples. And like, if this is a southern slope, and you can kind of tell by looking at the topography, this is going to be a good spot to look for wild onions or whatever. You know, there's ways of doing that you can teach somebody without having to give them your spots.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I don't.
I also call into question somebody's hunting skills. Like here, so my mother taught me this lesson when I was a kid. If you loan a friend money and expect to get it back, you're going to ruin a friendship. Sharing grouse covers is the same thing. If you bring somebody to a grouse cover and expect them not to come back, even if you ask them to not come back, you're dooming that relationship.
Right.
You just are.
Yeah.
But to my point is when I'm going to take somebody hunting, depending on what that person means to me, might mean the difference in quality of place I will take them to hunt.
Right.
So there are, like Kevin, my filmmaker, I take him to my best places, you know. He finds covers with me now, you know, like there's covers that I would claim are both of ours, you know, at this point. But point being, like, there's certain people where you're going to do certain things. But so if you're so threatened by the fact that you have this cover, you've taken it, and now this person has come back, I honestly call into question how good of a hunter you are in the first place, because it's like, so is that really the only place you hunt?
Is that your only
and
spot?
also, I question whether if you found that place, because that sounds like your dad showed it to you, and you haven't really found anything new since, because that's what that sounds like to me.
Yeah.
You know, so like point being, like, it's just like, I'm sorry, like there are, you know, and I see this a bit. Again, depending on how good the habitat is in your area, how good bird numbers are or whatnot, this can affect, like, you know, where I am in the Lakes region in New Hampshire, grouse numbers are not the best. There are plenty of grouse, nevertheless, if you want to put the time in, to keep you very entertained for a season. And I'm hesitant to take other people grouse hunting there. Woodcock hunting, you know, all the time. No problem doing that. But one of the things I see in that is this weird conflict of, like, I'll run into deer hunters in an area and I'll be bird hunting, and they'll be like, you can't bird hunt here. And first of all, it's like, dude, this is public land, first of all, or public access, because New Englanders, we have a very skewed vision of what public land is. Public access should be our only term up here. So public access. And, you know, like, they'll say something to you like, oh, you know, my grandfather's been hunting here. We've been hunting here for 4 generations. And it's like, okay, yeah, dude, like, you don't own the property. A, B, like I found my way here, and, like, no offense, dude, there's not grouse everywhere, but there are, in fact, deer everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I have run into this conflict of some cases where, and again, it's not like I see a truck there and I throw a bird dog down. It's like I go in there, I hunt, and then somebody's sitting at my truck when I get back.
Yeah.
And they're like horrified that I've just run through this area with a dog, because, you know, their assumption is that, you know, a deer has never seen a dog, as if there's not a million coyotes running through the woods every single day, you know, or domestic dogs for that matter. But, like, point being, like, just this overly, like, you know, like, whatever. And it's just like this entitlement of, like, dude, like, there's a million things you could say to me that aren't, this is mine, when it's not. Like, you could say to me something like, oh, like, I'm on to a big buck here, and, like, I'm so close. And I'd say, you know what, dude? Cool.
That's a whole different thing to say to somebody.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
I get what you're putting down. But right now, all you said to me is, I deer hunt here, and I have never worked to deer hunt anywhere else. Yeah. And you have come here to find a very difficult animal to find that just happens to live here as well. You know, like as if there's 30 other places for me to go within 50 feet, you know, like.
I think like a big part of what we're talking about here, it's kind of in the identity politics of the last few years. One thing that I've thought about is that a lot of what people are upset about are traits that still exist amongst a generation of people that's on their way out. Like if you spend some time around people who are 60 and 70 years old, you might hear some words that you find offensive. Mm-hmm. Or they might say things that you're like, ooh, geez, I mean, I wouldn't say that. Like, you could reword that, but it's like, okay, but they're on their way out. Yep. And similarly, who's inheriting hunting? Gen X, millennials, Gen Z coming into it. With, like you alluded to before, an entirely different set of social values, an entirely different set of environmental values. One thing I'll say about millennials and Gen Z in particular, I won't say this about my generation of X's, but really communally oriented, you know? Yep. So that thing of like, this is my spot and I expect to come out here and be alone with hundreds of acres. It's like, you know, that's kind of, I feel like all that's on its way out. Yep. And it's just, we're dealing with, those are still the economically dominant and, you know, maybe, you know, population dominant folks, but like probably going to be different in 10 years, right? A lot of those people aren't going to be hunting anymore.
Absolutely. And that's, I, you know, again, to my fear of the future of hunting and honestly, the future of guns is that we've allowed it to stall in time, thinking that somehow building that wall higher is going to be its saving grace, when it's quite the opposite. The lack of adaptation, the lack of moving on is ultimately what is going to be a death blow to things. Like people have to make it their own, you know, and in a lot of cases, hunting is one of those things where people are always going to find themselves in the end of it in the same place. Like, I feel like, you know, you joke about that. Everybody jokes about that evolution of a hunter. You know, first it's just like, I want to shoot anything. You know, like I want to shoot one thing. Then it's like, I want to shoot as many things as I can. Then it's like, I want to shoot something in a specific method. And then it's like, I want to shoot the biggest thing. And then you get that ultimate stage of like, well, I'm like really taking actually all of this in. And this is actually many things. And it's not about any of these one things, you know? And I think no matter what generation we paint it, they're going to have that journey. So I think, you know, young people, when they do their things, they are discovering these things for the first time. They didn't grow up with books sitting next to them that told these stories of other people. They didn't, you know, I grew up with a Peter Capstick book in my hand, you know, like I read those books like they were the Bible, you know. I went to Africa to hunt Cape buffalo because I read so many of his books, only to be severely disappointed. It is not... at least in my experience, hunting Cape buffalo did not pan out like a Peter Capstick book. So, anyways, which is a good thing too. But anyways, but like, so point being, like, you do, you know, since we have this chasm, you know, because we lost hunters and now we've recruited just new people. So you have this chasm of no passed on knowledge or anything else. And then again, you run into generations that are, you know, like I call millennials, like the but why, you know, and you know, I know people are hard to believe this, but you know, I'm 41 years old. I'm a millennial. You know, like that's a hard pill for me. I'm on X right on the edge. I feel the difference. Because so it's like 41, some people debate. Some people would say that my age, I'm actually the last Gen Xer. Yeah. And then some people say that I'm the first millennial. So I'm literally 1982 on that year. Yeah. That's on that cusp of, so I have plenty of Gen X, you know, traits or upbringing, as well as millennials. And young millennials are very different than me. Than you elder millennials? Yeah, that's us elder millennials. As you know, somebody 10 years older than me looks at me and they're like, this person is very different than me. But, you know, point is yes, you know, like, and so we did an interesting study around this specific thing. And this was something that I was curious about. And this kind of gets to, again, our commentary about growing up watching Captain Planet and whatever else. So the question was around bag limits, and it was essentially a question about entitlement. And there is a clear indication that we can show that the older somebody is, they believe that they're entitled to a bag limit. As where the young person's perspective is, what is my effect when I kill that number of birds or even one bird? What is my effect on that micro landscape, meaning that one singular cover? This is a big conversation for younger people. So it's not this, I am going to go there and take what is mine. It is, how do I affect this ecosystem? How am I affecting? That is and when you start to think about these things, I'm sorry, the future of hunting looks pretty good.
Yes.
It looks pretty good. And unfortunately, the scary parts are the things that comes around, questions of gun rights and stuff like that. That's where things get scary, but again, that's because we've, as a culture have isolated ourselves, distanced ourselves, intentionally created that chasm. And that's where, that loss is going to come in of whatever else. And, the irony is too, I'm like dead against using pen raised birds to introduce people to hunting. I think it's a bad idea. Like, it's the worst idea. It's playing with your food, in my opinion. If like you want to do that, take up homesteading, do that. But like this whole idea of taking a domestic animal and then releasing it and then going to hunt it, I'm sorry, it's a little bit Hunger Games for me. It's a little bit like post-apocalyptic, like we shouldn't be doing this. For training dogs, absolutely. The problem is that we're setting up this false expectation. And this comes down to what I think is an important question and something we should be thinking about is quality over quantity. Hunter recruitment should be about quality, not quantity. Unfortunately, again, I've pointed out the fact that the quantity is an issue because of funding. We should be recruiting hunters, period, even if funding wasn't a problem, but we should be recruiting quality hunters. And so point being, if I go out and take somebody to a pen-raised preserve and they shoot birds over let's say a dog that's just like ridiculously steady on pen-raised birds because it's the only thing they do, and like this, so they have like literally just this seamless experience that doesn't involve jumping over a mountain in northern New England or or ending up in a bog that you feel like you can't turn around in, and you say, oh my god, what direction do I now go without going in over my head? They haven't had these experiences. And so point being, it's like, I don't want to recruit somebody who's now going to go grouse hunting and say, this is too hard. So it's like, why didn't you just start there? Like, the point is, like, if you get out there and you can't kill grouse and then you're like, I'm not going to do that, okay. Like, just, that's it. The transaction's done, like the fact that we're trying to make it anything different, like, okay, like we're going to, like, this is what it's like, and it can be like that grouse hunting. No, it's never going to be like that. It's never
I think we
going
talked
to
a little
like
bit
that.
about this in our turkey podcast, because we talked about turkey being a good way to introduce hunters rather than deer. Deer can just be a way to make people think like, I never want to do this. This is so hard. Nothing
boring.
ever happens. It's boring. That makes sense. And what you just said about, I think you really summed it up nicely about the bag limit thing. That makes a lot of sense to me. And that it doesn't matter if we like it or don't like it. Like, hunting is getting inherited by another generation regardless if you like it or don't. But I like the fact that generation is thinking about the impact that they're having, because that's the environment they've grown up into. They have to think about that.
And I see, something like your brand represents where things are going. So it's like, when I think about deer hunters or people, in that world where I grew up, you knew deer hunting things and all your knowledge stopped there. Grouse hunting made me pick up all sorts of new knowledge that I never thought I was going to have about really being able to identify different types of trees, understanding, hundreds of food sources and all these different things that could, and even just being able to look at the complexity of both age structure and tree type to understand where grouse want to live. This idea of like, also like, I think about hunting with Kevin. Again, I'll use an example. Our lead filmmaker, who's, 15, no, more than that, 17 years younger than me, I think, or 16 years younger than me. We're going through the woods hunting, and he's sitting there picking up lobster, mushrooms. And like, that's cool.
Yeah.
And the only other person that I've had that experience with is Sabrina, so my significant other. Her grandfather, who's from Italy, as in is an Italian citizen, he wants to go, like, he wants to actually hunt pen-raised pheasant, which, again,
chaps your ass a little bit.
Yeah. So, but nevertheless, he doesn't have a dog anymore. So Sabrina's like, will you take him? Yeah, of course. So I go out there and we do this thing, and like, no sooner we get out there and we end up in this like little island in this, pheasant stalking site in Massachusetts. And suddenly he's pulling out all these, used bags and picking mushrooms. And then he, and he doesn't speak the best English, then communicates to me how we have to make the swing around the property so we can end up on the old apple trees that are in there, and we can then pick the apples. So what's funny is I've seen this very old world, you had all these skills way back, and then I don't see it for all these generations, and then I see this young person that I take out doing those things, and that... It's funny, we don't think about that chasm existing. Because again, 41 years old, we want to just think we're badass hunters. You grew up hunting, like, I know what it's like to get lost in a blizzard, I've slept in the woods overnight as if like, that's some hey, like, dude, you're an idiot. Like, why didn't you learn the skills? And like, so point being, like, we have this kind of gap of like, we actually lost a lot of knowledge even when we were actively in it. And I see that revival coming, like this, being able to identify, plant species that you can gather, all these different things. Like, I've found, more recently a fascination with like all birds. So obsessive over songbirds and stuff like that. And like going out of my way with my dog, to like, find this, obscure wren that like, we happen to find somewhere, and you're sitting there with binoculars with the dog next to you. And it's like, I mean, if people watch it, they probably think I'm insane. But like, anyway, so point being, like, there's so much more. And I think this has been this whole conversation. Like the return of the naturalist hunter kind of, huh? And that's what to my point of like, if we're going to survive in the future in our society, people need to look at that and see that, and actually see that person that goes there like a druid and shows you, oh, actually, you see that thing up on the side of that tree, that little knot, you can put that in tea, and it's, it's actually an antioxidant, like, so point being, like, that is what is going to connect a more, modern world, because, this is the thing. It's like, just walking through nature and just that, a single track mind, just hunting a deer, just hiking through. It's not, I think about your stuff with like the metaverse versus like, we're gravitating to like digital stuff and everything because it's so complex, because there is like, our minds are very busy, but like those things exist in the forest. Right. And like, but we're just like, we've lost it all, So like, it's not like, oh, that mushroom you can eat, that one you can't. Oh, by the way, here's this interesting thing. Earthworms aren't from, these are not from here. Blew my mind on that episode, by the way. Fascinated by earthworms now. So anyway, so like, point being, like, these different things, like, that's the stuff that's going to pass this on. That's going to, save hunting. It's going to save our interaction. And this is a powerful thing to think about. And what we need to do is, as Americans, as modern people, recognize that this landscape existed before we conquered it, before we stole this land. And the people that lived here were very in tune with it, and they did things to it. They burnt it down. I was just reading about the Mi'kmaq people, who lived with dogs, and the Europeans' first writing accounts of them would say that they'd go into these people's homes, and there would be 30 dogs sleeping with the family, and the dogs would keep them warm in the winter. And so everything, hunted with them, they did everything with them, and it was an entire culture that existed around the use of dogs as a tool. That's awesome. So and what's crazy, like the crazy part is in the winters, so the snow pack would depend how effective the dogs would be to run down moose, bear, whatever it might be. Well, obviously bear would be a different part of the season, but they even actively hunted porcupines with them, which is wild, because like my dog loves hunting porcupines, unfortunately. But like, so there's these interesting parts, but like, So if the snow conditions were wrong and the dogs couldn't run on top of the snow and therefore they wouldn't be able to run down moose and stuff, they would then eat the dogs to survive the winter. Yeah. And that's just like, I mean, like, just think about like the layer of just like, I'm sorry, like how much like we're just doing it wrong. Like I'm not saying I could never eat my dog. Will never happen. I'm not saying like that. But what I'm trying to say is like we, whether people want to admit it or not, especially in North America, we actually have a closer relationship here with people living as a predator, as a natural force on the landscape than most places in the world. Certainly more so than Europe. So point being, you can only go back, you don't have to go back many generations to get this direct connection on this land being actively part of where humans are just part of the landscape. Yeah. So, and that's, I think, an important tool as we go into the future and we talk about the future of hunting, is that humans are a natural part of the landscape. Our killing of other animals is a natural part of our landscape. This is a natural interaction. It's the same thing. Wolves are a natural part of our landscape, as much as people don't want to see that happen, you know, the pushback around that kind of things. Human conflict with nature is natural. You know, like that is inherently, nature is trying to kill all of us, humans and animals alike, trees, insects. That's just it. It's a cruel place. It's a beautiful place though. You know, so I think that there's something to be said about this going back and rewinding and getting more intimate with the land and thinking that those ultimate skills, the skills to show other people that, even if they don't choose, and this is one thing that's very important. Hunting does not have to survive by making people the same as you. It only has to survive by people accepting what we are. So point being, like, we don't have to change people to our politics for it to work. We don't have to change people to be the same as us. We don't have to, if somebody comes and they try hunting and don't like it, you still probably created an ambassador. So point being is like, there doesn't have to be the sameness.
Homogeneity.
To create a future where hunting exists. There just simply has to be honesty, which is, I don't believe in using words like harvest. You can harvest fiddleheads. I don't harvest birds. I kill them. It's that simple. Like the honesty of this. And I kill a bird and I feel bad about it every time. When I kill a deer, I feel bad about it every time. But I do it anyways. I have human emotions around all those things. Those are the conversations that are actually, when you're sitting there at a cocktail party and you're surrounded by people who are, you know, maybe fascinated, have a preformed opinion. When you say those more honest things, like, yeah, you know, like there is an emotional experience when I kill an animal. Like, I mean, yeah, I feel really bad when I shoot a bear. You know, like I'm like, man, like look at that thing. He's like, yeah, you know, like this is, but like I eat it. I you know, I use that animal. I all these things, and there's something just so honest about that. And I'll tell you what, the whole like, I'm a stone cold killer thing is not like, that's not going to be what like, that's what
wins people over.
Yeah, because that's actually how we got here. You know, like that's how
that looks like trauma.
Yeah. That's like, you know, like just go out and you know, I want to kill things. Like it's just not like it's just like we need to show people that that's not what's happening. And to my point, younger generations are just even more savoring it. Yeah. I mean, and grouse hunting is that. You know, rough grouse hunting is not. I'm sorry, it's a calorie negative hunt. It's a great way if you want to lose weight.
Majorly calorie.
Yeah. Majorly. And you know, the better you get at it, the better your dogs are, all those things, sure, the more efficient you can get at it. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you a life hack. You can trade grouse for bear meat like nothing, you know, like that's a life hack for you, you know, like there are certain things you can do to make it into a calorie positive hunt because, you know, they are a delicious bird and it is a culinary experience. It is you know, there are other aspects of it that are wonderful, you know, and so point being, it's like, and that's an interesting thing to kind of bring it back to Project Upland. Project Upland is one of the few brands that's gotten legs in kind of the modern hunting movement that's not food-based.
Interesting.
So it's not like, I'm sorry, like I use this term, it's the tapas of hunting, you know? It's like you can go out and...
I mean, I do see some recipes in there.
Yeah, and that's to my point. Like you're going to it's like, it's either you're cooking dinner or you're making a phenomenal meal. So it's kind of like that. Like, I'm going to go out and learn this new recipe and buy all these obscure ingredients. I got to go all these places and do all this work.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to make it an experience, or I'm, throwing something in the crock pot I'm eating today.
Yeah.
Those are two separate experiences. So I look at it like that. It's like you're going to put like a profound amount of energy into hunting something and then recognize that you're really going to have to savor it once you get to the end, so that's hence why I call it the opposite of hunting, So there is this aspect of, there is a food narrative to it for sure, but like it's not like if you think you're going to fill your freezer with grouse and woodcock for a season, like you better be checking your ethics,
check your possession limits too.
Yeah, totally. So point being, like, it's not really, and I think, what has worked, why it has gotten legs is the dogs.
Yeah.
The dogs are ultimately the key to it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to remember at some point why we have dogs in the first place. I just feel like people have forgotten.
First domesticated animal, man, and they were domesticated to hunt.
Yeah, I know. People really forgotten about this.
And Chihuahuas. Chihuahuas are literally a breed made to hunt. Like, it's just like people don't realize that. Like, literally, there is not many dogs that you can look at and say that this dog was not bred for a specialty purpose to do some kind of working dog performance, which is pretty insane. I mean, there's such an incredibly incredible. I couldn't imagine a life without dogs.
Yeah, you said it before about how you'll end up with other dogs, and I think that's one of the most poignant and beautiful things about the relationship is, like, that you're going to have multiple dogs in your life, which means I had a friend just had to put down a 17-year-old Shiba Inu that he's had as long as he's been with his wife, like it's like really, really hard, but it's like one of those every time I look at my dogs, I think it's like there in my heart, like, oh, one day, and it's just part of it, but
and it's gonna be devastating because
it also means that there'll be more dogs and you get to have a lot of them in your life, and it's just, you can't change it. It's just how it goes.
And what's interesting thinking about that thread of generational, how many younger people are not having kids and having dogs?
Me and my wife, we got got 2 kids and they both are covered in hair.
Yep, same here, man.
Dude, tell people about how they get the magazine and your book, by the way. Thanks for getting me a copy, because I went on Amazon. It was like $75 or something.
Yeah, I have like 50 or 60 of them left sitting in my house, and I've just been too lazy to put them up for sale. But I didn't.
About $75 a wallop. You might want to get them up there.
Yeah, man. I'm not much of the capitalistic price gouger, but I don't know that I'll ever do a reprinting. Okay. Maybe someday.
I'm glad to have a copy.
Yeah, because it was Urban Deer Complex and then Urban Deer Complex 2.0. So there are 2 books. You could ultimately read.
Are they different books, or is it a second edition?
It's
expanded.
They're different books, but there's pretty much not anything in the first book that wasn't in the second book.
Okay.
I learned more, and also I finished that book after I gave up deer hunting, ironically, and it was because there was some parts I wasn't willing to divulge into.
Oh yeah,
I wasn't willing to give other people all of the tools.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I read a book by an athlete recently. It's like, now that I'm retired, I'm willing to share some of these secrets.
There's some crazier things, that I let known in that book that were tactics that were above, over the top, So I let that come out. So, you can find them used here and there. People do put them up for sale. People still email me. Since I got my commissionership and now that my number's up in the state fishing game, I get phone calls of people being like, oh, can you get me a copy of that book? And I'm just like, dude, this is not why my number's here. But anyway, so that's, no more. Project Upland is just projectupland.com. We're a small business. And I think that this is something that's important, is that we're not owned by some massive corporation.
Right.
We have turned down. You can
tell when you look at the book.
Yeah,
it's really nice.
Yeah, we have turned down multiple opportunities to be bought out. I will. It's funny, as they say, everybody's for sale. It's not about money for me. It's about, I'm very proud of it. It's a reflection of who I am. It's a reflection of all the people that work in it with me. Jennifer, my business partner, Gabby, our managing editor, Kevin, our lead filmmaker, Josh, who's our just insanely talented art director. Each one of these is a piece of all of us. And, we survive because people subscribe, not because some big corporation writes us some big check.
How many issues do you do a year?
4 issues a year.
Yeah.
And then Hunting Dog Confidential, which is our other publication, which comes out biannually, so twice a year. It's essentially 200 pages of the most insane dog stories from all over the world.
Okay. So people can submit too if they have.
They could subscribe to that too. And we don't. Hunting Dog Confidential is about our love for dogs. So it's not. There's hounding. There's just all sorts of different, big game hunting, like you name it.
Right.
So it's about us as the people who are Project Upland loving dogs in general and wanting to be able to take kind of those guardrails off and just be like, oh my God, did you read this? And we work with a really international crowd on that one. We're having people write from all over the world because, a lot of these dogs are from different parts of the world.
Right.
And so some of it is going back to those places. So there's that. Project Upland's 4 times a year. Hunting Dog Confidential's 2 times a year. And then we publish audiobooks. So we essentially have resurrected some of the classic upland hunting books. So
no kidding.
Our most recent one was...
so you have to go get the rights to those and then...
Yes, in some cases we've got... So our most recent... we got this guy, Justin, who does an exceptional job. He also does we have a podcast called Project Upland on the Go, which is literally just our online articles, audio read. And so he's like a voice actor. It's just like really good.
Cool.
So it's actually really cool. So like if you're got a lot of windshield time, commute too much, and you can't read, it's a great place to kind of do that. But so we do audiobooks. Our most recent one was The Upland Shooting Life by George Bird Evans. We did New England Grouse Shooting by William Hardin Foster just before that. Which we had to get the rights to both of those books. I have a handwritten letter that's about to be framed and put on my new office wall from William Hardin Foster's grandson, which is just like, I'm not worthy. But like, and then some of the other books, like we've done like woodcock shooting, stuff like that is public domain. So we do kind of a blend there. And then we're about to publish our first book as Project Upland, which is going to be Pointing Dogs Volume 2. So Craig Koshik, who's technically the editor-in-chief of Hunting Dog Confidential, is a famous dog historian from Canada, just like insane, retired, has traveled all over the world, translated texts from all different languages to literally unpack the history of hunting dogs. So Pointing Dogs Volume 2 is the sequel to Pointing Dogs Volume 1, The Continentals, which were about all the pointing breeds that came from continental Europe. This next book is the United Kingdom in Ireland. So the Gordon Setter, the Irish Setter, English Setter, Pointer, stuff like that. So we're publishing that, which I'm really excited about because like Craig was like an idol. Like I idolize Craig, and he wrote in the first issue of Project Upland magazine, and like I fangirled so hard. And like now that like to be like publishing his book is just like
that's
this
awesome.
Insane
That's
honor.
awesome.
So we have that. We have another book that we're in discussion with that we're going to be bringing forward. That's a relatively famous grouse writer that's still alive. That I think is insanely talented. Just an absolute artist with words. So we're in negotiations for that, and then we have. We were going to do a recipe book this year, and I think that's going to get benched for this other book now that we get access to it.
Time,
So that's kind of like where we're at. So really about, and then, you can see our films, which, we produce these like super cinematic films that are really...
Where do they live?
YouTube.
Yep.
Essentially. Okay. So, but you can find them on projectupland.com. Just go on there and click watch and
domain.
Boom. Yeah. So it's just we give them away for free. We did our documentary Public Grouse some years ago, which you can get on like Apple and Prime and stuff like that. It actually trended like top 10 documentaries for like 6 months a couple of years ago. And so that was like a 1-hour film that we like went to essentially like all of the grouse species in North America and like told people's individual stories around it. It was very conservation centric.
Yeah.
A lot about their crises in some, they're hunted in some cases, not in others, but I don't know that I know a lot of people keep asking if we're going to do something similar to it. We've discussed it. We've talked about doing a few things around it. If we do another one, it's going to be very conservation based. I think even more purposefully so, because I will say that the core mission at the end of the day of Project Upland, and I will repeat this again and again, is that we want to leave it better than we found it. Mm-hmm. And that relates to the dogs, that relates to the birds, that relates to the habitat, that relates to the culture, that relates to all of it. The information, I believe in the preservation of the people before me, hence why we're creating audiobooks. And
Right.
I'm very passionate about that. Even if I don't agree with some of them and some of their content, I'm a firm believer in the keeping of public record.
Yeah. It's an important distinction there.
Yes. So point being, carrying that on is so important to our tradition. So that's what Project Upland is about. You know, it's about a healthy respect and effort to preserve what's gone, and also to push into the future at the same time. To do those two acts at once, you know, and conservation, that's it. You know, conservation is our, you know, it's funny. I had somebody ask me recently, it was a discussion around working for the current president and doing some conservation policy stuff. And they said to me, oh, well, did you learn your lesson? Like, you're not going to do it next time. And I'm like, see, like, that's where you got it wrong. Like, you think that because there was a fallout, we lost a lot of subscribers, there was a lot of financial blowback, you know, and, you know, as if people thought they taught me a lesson. And it's like, I'm going to say this out loud. There's not a price on my morality. Yeah. There's not a price on my commitment. And there is no political party on my commitment to get the mission done. Meaning I don't care what letter is in front of that politician's name. It is an ends to a mean, which is I care about the birds. And there is not a bird in this country, a native bird that you can hunt in this country that is not somewhere on a list of conservation species of conservation concern. So point being, these birds are in a very dire place no matter how you paint it. Ruffed grouse are, in my lifetime, there are places you can no longer hunt them. There are places that they are marked endangered on state lists that you used to be able to hunt them in my lifetime. Like, these things are happening right now. The crisis of sage grouse is real. The crisis of the prairie chicken is real. The crisis of the American woodcock is real. You know, these things exist, and at such an exasperated level, and they're also just canaries in the coal mine, because they're an easy way to look at how sick our landscapes actually are, because they're incredible specialists. They require a very biodiverse habitat, a very diverse ecosystem. And the reason that they are the animals that are most threatened in this country is because those habitats are threatened, meaning like that biodiversity is threatened. So I think that they're a great lens to look at how bad
indicator species.
How bad we are in a way. And again, to this point of, we just have to get to the end of the game. Like, we need to win. We need to get our culture in a place where these birds are a concern, or therefore the habitat is a concern, because that's the end game. This habitat matters. Is we need everybody involved, and we need to work with private landowners. We need to work with energy. We need to work with all of these stakeholders. This isn't about some kind of, you know, we're going to do this no matter, like, it's not like smack you across the face with a stick. It's like, we need to come together as a community and be like, yo, dude, this is a problem. And it doesn't care what political spectrum people on. If you don't care, like, if you think fracking is bad or whatever it is, it has nothing to do with some political charge, ideological thing. It has to do with the fact that this is a real crisis, and everybody has to be involved to solve it. And once we start putting ourselves on footing that's of identity politics or whatever else, like, the game is lost. And the reason I ended up doing the things I've done is because I saw that firsthand in the previous administration, where we were told one thing and another thing happened. We can thank all the CWD money that was supposed to solve CWD. You know where it all went? It went to private deer farming. That's not solving the crisis. That's giving your buddies money. Those things, those dishonest steps, like when you close all sorts of land for big energy, and then say you opened 3.6 million acres of land but failed to say that you closed 10 million, that's not right. And I'm not saying that it has to be about politics, but it doesn't have to be I identify as one as the other, because there are Republicans that are doing very good things, like it's Roy Blunt was part of RAWA. Roy Blunt was very passionate about RAWA. So point being, it has to be about honesty, and honesty happens everywhere. It's just that simple. Like, if anybody thinks that I think that some politician, like, I don't idolize politicians, period, hard stop. And like, if you find yourself in that position, that dictating how you're going to act in a space that is desperate for conservation, you should really rethink what you're doing, because that's not what this is. It's about the birds. It's about the land. It's about the habitat. It's about sustainability. We used that word earlier. It's about it going on in perpetuity. It's about that never going away. And we need honest conversations. We need to say, yes, energy is going to happen, but there needs to be limits. And a perfect example of that was the Obama administration's trying to solve the sage-grouse crisis, forced everybody into the same room. He didn't favor one side or the other. He didn't say to the environmentalist groups, these are doing the righteous work of the world, and these ranchers in the middle suck, and the energy people, they gave me money. This isn't what happened. Like, they came into that room, and I got to work with Ken Salazar, who was the person who masterminded this when I worked on some of this conservation policy. I mean, just an incredibly intelligent human. And they brought everybody together and said, it's like, I picture it like when my mom was little and we fought as brothers. It would be like, I'm going to leave the room, and you're all staying in here until I come back and your story matches. Like, that's what they did. Yeah. So it was like, literally, this is the problem. Until we come back in the room and the story matches, you're all in the doghouse, right. And they got something done, and they made some real progress. And then all of that was undone overnight. Okay. And so what I want people to simply look at is that single issue voting is not helping anybody, and being loyal to a party to a fault is not helping anybody. And that goes for Democrats or Republicans. It goes for either side. When we're fighting for something this precious, which is our literal planet, like, it's just like, we need to get the job done. And like, we have overpopulated deer. So like, I get a lot of the hunting industry, like hunting culture is like, oh, we're in a golden age. We're not. Like, this is biodiversity is at the worst it's ever been. Extinction is happening faster than ever. And I know that, like, even on climate change, and this is one of the things I'm going to say on this identity politics thing, there are people that don't agree that climate change is happening. There's debates on the minutia of why. Climate change is happening. Literally nobody disagrees. Like, the agreement is whether or not it was man-made. Point being, it's null and void. It is just happening. What we know is that the only way to combat climate change when it comes to our world is habitat, meaning we need to create more habitat. Yeah. And part of this is I've seen firsthand of people position of powers in our industry, because they are so stubborn, refuse to embrace stuff like funding to combat climate change and essentially create habitat, just based on a simple principle that they don't believe climate change is real. Just some old stubborn thing. And this is my thing. If it gets the job done, shut up, take the money, and just stew about it over your dinner with your friends. Like, we need to set these things aside and move into, like, we just need results. Yeah. And again, like, if you're going to be mad about something, you're going to be mad about hunter recruitment, know the problem. Don't just be like, I hate new hunters. Well, why do you get new hunters? Well, because state agencies can't fund. How often do you show up at your commission hearings? How often do you get engaged in how your state funding? Have you written any of your reps to say, how come my DNR was denied their request for public funds to do habitat work? Like, don't be mad because we're like, these agencies are recruiting hunters and be like, I'm angry because I can't get my elk tag. Yeah. Like, address the problem, be on their team, like, solve it, be like critical, be involved in the system. And if there's one thing that I have learned since I became a commissioner of New Hampshire Fish and Game, when I sit there and say, what do I think will be the most useful thing that I can do as minuscule AJ the commissioner that has come through all sorts of incredible people that have been on that commission that I feel bad that I was even considered, like I'm not worthy, is that when I leave there is that younger people are involved. When you see that it doesn't take many people to speak up, to change things that have meaningful impact on the rights of hunting, how hunting is considered, our environment, our habitat, that's it. I want people to be involved. Nonprofits, great. We should be doing those things, but we need to rally on our state levels and do things where things can get done. I mean, we have, we want to talk about effects of issues. Hound hunting. I mean, hound hunting is in the crosshairs on every state level. And the only way you're going to change it is not sitting there blasting into the world, I'm angry about them banning hounds. You need to show up to hearings. You need to show up there. You need to tell all your friends in that state to do these things. You need to you need to rally. And this is it. You need to be environmental activists. Mm-hmm. That's what this is. It's about activism. It's not about passive conservation. It's about activism. And that's what I hope people get inspired by. That's what Project Upland's used for. It's used to be a megaphone of, hey, this is this crisis that other people don't know about. You should care about it. And that's the least I can do. There's not enough of me to go around and be involved and do all the things that I want to do. There's just not enough resources. And everybody has their fight in the places they live. And they need to learn about them, and they need to care about them, and they need to, grassroots, get involved with them. This whole big bitching on a grander caliber culturally is not our friend. It's not our friend on any scale. So, I'm sorry to get extra on the soapbox here, but that's what I like. You want to see change? Show up, ask, email your DNR, your Fish and Game department, ask them how you're involved. How do I give my input? Pension that department. We're in the process of preparing a letter for the Commission of the state of Ohio to ask them how they're going to respond to the threat of the woodcock flyway as a result of all the environmental catastrophes that just happened there. Mm-hmm. And that's it. This is the thing. These organizations only have to act when held accountable. Right. When you now say something to them and say, I want to know as an out-of-stater how your state is now affecting my bird's migration route, mm-hmm. where, what is they're required to give you an answer. They're required to, so point
now
being,
it's on their radar.
Yeah. And even that, I'm sure they're all dodging it. Let's be real. Mm-hmm. That whole thing has been,
swept under
by everybody involved, mm-hmm. There's laws that were loosened up in a previous administration that shouldn't have been, and also the current administration just wants to pretend it never happened. Mm-hmm. And neither of those things work for me, literally neither. So, but point being, nothing's stopping, who are we? We're at the end of the day, I'm sorry, oh sure, are we a national publication? Yeah, but in the world of publications, I'm not the New York Times. We're nobodies. Right. We're literally nobodies. But point being, we're taking that step to say, hey, as Project Upland, we are coming to you and saying, we want to know what your action plan is and what the effect of this environmental crisis is on the American woodcock. Mm-hmm. Because that's our foothold. Because I want to know. Because I care about everything that's happening on that. I picked up Kevin when we drove out to Pheasant Fest. 15 miles down the road at his buddy's house who owns bird dogs, who trains his bird dogs right there. That's going to affect these people, mm-hmm. And that's to my point of this microness of you don't necessarily need to be there are times to rally on a national level, to fight for something like RAWA, to fight for the North American Grasslands Act. Great mm-hmm. example. That's one that's happening right now. That's one people should be concerned about. The Farm Bill. Something very important. Those are things that we should be, when they happen, should be active of. But your daily should be what's happening right next to you. Locally. And I assure you that there are more than enough things to keep you busy. There are more than enough, you go into your state forest and it says that there's supposed to be grouse there, but you don't see a tree that's younger than 40 years old. You should be asking some questions. Mm-hmm. Because you know what? Nobody else is. That's the thing. Like, people kind of think like, well, somebody must have said something. I assure you, once you get in that room, nobody is asking those questions. And that's part of this, is just simply asking the questions and saying, hey, dude, like, how come you're not doing this? Like, why did you stop cutting these trees? Why are we no longer allowing this? Why are you allowing this? You know, like, these simple questions, they force government to work, you know, like, and that's it. Cause like, I'm sorry, like, I've been a government employee. I've worked in law enforcement. Like, there's a lot of bare minimum going on around there. Like, and until somebody's told to do something, or a crisis is somehow it's like you're on cruise control, you know, like, that's it. So point being, like, there needs to be that level. And I just hope that, people take up this like little angst that they're feeling on the internet. And I'm sorry, when like you're blasting that on the internet and all you're doing, you're just a social influencer. And that's like, social influencer, honestly, is just like, you actually aren't influencing anything other than just bitching out loud, because social activism would result in you doing something about it and inspiring people to do something about it, but you're not. So point being, like, that there needs to be, like, the rubber needs to hit the road. And that's where we need to start doing these things. Oh, I'm angry about hunter recruitment. Why? Well, not why. We already know why. Like, but why is it like that? Why do they have to do it?
Right.
You know, and solve that problem. Like, everybody wants to be a critic. Nobody wants to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying we're all going to get it wrong. I get it wrong all the time, man. I just like, and you got to have an open mind like that. You have like preconceived notions about things, or like, I think that this is whatever. And then like, you got to have an open enough mind to have it blown. Yeah. And you also need to put yourself around opinions that are counter to yourself. You know, like, and that's like, I mean, I work in the hunting industry and I'm a bleeding heart liberal. I am confronted daily with opinions that are counter to mine, and it's fine. That's okay. Like, it's
so different than what you hear from people, though. It's really unique. That's what I really like about talking to you, is one of the things that I like. There's a few things, but I really like that you have some perspectives that run so counter to the typical dialogue that you hear, because it is quite an echo chamber in the hunting world. So I also just commend your the bravery with which you do it. Well, you just seem to just do it, and that's awesome.
I'll never forget, I had somebody like call me out when I've done some of this and been like, oh, you're just what's that term for when like you just like social whatever, when you're like do something for like to be like, oh, I checked that box.
You're virtue signaling?
Virtue signaling, you know, like virtue signaling, and like I'm just doing what's popular. And I'll never forget the one, because I don't really entertain these conversations anymore. I just like whatever, because you just, some of mine you're not going to change, and it's like if people are angry, they're angry, like, and it's literally nothing to do with you.
Yeah, they're suffering.
Like it's like, I assure you that like doing what I've done is not the popular thing. I assure you, I don't like show up at SHOT Show and people from gun companies are shaking my hands and saying, good job, dude.
You're so popular.
And I assure you that I wasn't getting overwhelmed with emails that said, thanks for doing the right thing, dude. Like, so point being, like, there have been negative consequences, and like, cool, like, all right, dude. Like, and it was, because again, like, this is the irony of it all. People want to talk a big game about doing what's right, about everything else. Do what's right, and just see if you're going to get comfortable in that skin. It's been an adjustment period, but I will say, the more that time passes on, the more I just like, I'm sorry if to believe this, but I just don't give a fuck. Yeah. Because it's just like, okay, like, I'm sorry that offend you. Like, and that's the irony of it. Like, I'm sorry. It's just like things offending people is kind of like part of this whole conversation in the first place. But yet you're saying
like,
I'm offending
welcome
you.
to Earth. You know, that's what I always think. It's like, welcome to Earth. You're going to get offended a lot.
Yeah. And it's like also like, I'm sure that grouse I shot at this morning's offended too. But like, that's life, man.
Wow. AJ, it's been awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been fantastic. I feel like some things got said on this show today that have never come up on the podcast before, and so it's unique to your perspective. So it's awesome, man.
I wish I was on for the Earthworm podcast. But, okay.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a podcast guest or topic suggestion, or maybe a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host the WildFed TV show for? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 or 2 of the WildFed TV show, go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 20 episodes. Season 3 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2023. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed shirts, hoodies, hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.